was working late one night.
Salutations, ghouls and freaks. Welcome to this podcast of Storm, we're insane slashers, undead blood drinkers, and all around crooked beans and bean talk, and it ain't things, all pop culture. With me, as always, is my co-host, the Mage of Madness, aka the Authenticator, Dalton L. Morton.
Good evening, everyone. One more week. There are not enough days in October. This October in particular seemed to go by way too frickin' quickly. Seriously, there are nowhere near enough days in October. Not at all. Well, we have one more week, and I plan to make the most of it. So, one more week, and then we will be in November, where Brainstormer will have a birthday and it will be Thanksgiving, and then we will be in December, which will also be fun, but not nearly as personally fun for me as October.
And I'm your host, Slayer, Scarecrow, first here, there, Brainstorm Pop Culture. How's everyone doing?
I'm doing well. I have made a pile of work for myself because October tends to be when my creativity peaks, and that has resulted in me creating more videos on my main channel. But it also has resulted in me coming up with 4 new video concepts for my main channel. So, in the course of the next week or so, I have 4 videos to make. Which, given that it takes me months on average to get around to making videos in general, that's a lot of work for me. But again, I'm going to make the most of this last week of October if it kills me. It may well kill me, but that's sort of in theme with the month. So, Hopefully, whenever I do actually die, it will be in October, so that it will be thematically appropriate.
So yeah, we are going to cover the Witches and Class Struggle article that we started last week. Though I am going to ask for everyone to give me about minute to find where we were last time.
Hmm. Also, yes, we are finishing off the condescending Lotus Eaters video because
Well,
we only made it about halfway through that as well.
we're gonna start on the drive.
Yeah, we're starting on the article though.
Yeah, but give me one thing. Okay, I'm fairly certain I have found where we were. And just so we have better context, I will scroll up a little bit more so we have some.
Hmm. And obviously, for the first half of both this and the Lotus Eaters video, check out the previous episode.
Yeah, podcast is on 237.
Oh my, we're getting up there in years. It won't be long before we're at 250.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, this is weird thing I'm just noticing as I'm like reading this. Trying to find a place that would be best suited for us.
Mm-hmm.
So I have better context.
Mm-hmm.
It does seem, which, I mean, good for them that they can keep these paragraphs able to flow into the next. But
Mm-hmm.
that does present a problem for us. I think we have to go back a while, so it wouldn't feel like out of place. But
Mm-hmm.
okay, for simplicity's sake, we are just going to move back a paragraph because
Mm-hmm.
I think we have enough context from last week that we don't need to do that. So,
Yep.
okay. But it was the jurists, the magistrates, and the demonologists, often embodied by the same person, who most contributed to the persecution. They were the ones who systematized the arguments, answered the critics, and perfected a legal machine that, by the end of the 16th century, gave a standardized, almost bureaucratic format to the trials, accounting for the similarities of the confessions across national boundaries. In that work, the men of the law count on the cooperation of the most reputed intellectuals of the time, including philosophers and scientists, who are still praised as the fathers of modern rationalism.
Okay. It's not a coincidence or a conspiracy that they made these trials similar or that they tried to rationalize these arguments. Because, okay, and again, this is harkening back to what I said last week. For all that classism might have been a factor in the witch trials, for all that misanthropy or misogyny or whatever the fuck may have been a factor in the witch trials, the core of the issue was that they believed these things. They actually, sincerely, and for truly, huh?
I didn't say anything.
Oh, it must have been the echo of my own voice then. But in any case, the core of the issue is that they actually believed this shit, and despite how irrational the shit they believed was, despite how irrational their starting premise was, they at least tried to act rationally within the context of that starting premise, which means they took it to its logical conclusion. Meaning that the reason why they chose to rationalize this was not some sort of cynical misanthropic bullshit that they came up with on the turn of a dime or something. It's because they actually believed these things and they chose to act as rationally as possible on those things. What I mean to say is, while some people may have cynically used the witch trials to get their own ends, the medieval equivalent of what would be in modern terms serial killers probably did take advantage of this hysteria to basically act as an excuse to kill people. For every one of those, there were at least 10 people who simply believed in this shit and chose to act on those beliefs. And so any analysis that doesn't at least allow for the fact that these beliefs were majoritarily not utilitarianly motivated, were not cynically motivated, but were actually the result of people genuinely believing in shit, is an analysis that is missing probably the core of the issue. For all that the other factors definitely affected things, and for all that, the medieval equivalent of serial killers probably did take advantage of it to some degree, that doesn't change the fact that these beliefs were sincere for a lot of people, especially the intellectuals who wrote the books that would later inform the legal system as to how to prosecute these alleged crimes. Anyway, moving forward.
Okay. Can you hear me? I just want to make sure of that.
Yes, I can hear you. It's a little bit echoey for some reason, but I can still hear you.
That's always one fucking thing after another. Alright, there can be no doubt then that the witch hunt was a major political initiative. The political nature of the witch hunt is further demonstrated by the fact that both Catholic and Protestant nations at war against each other in every other aspect joined arms and shared arguments to persecute witches. Thus, it is no exaggeration to claim that the witch hunt was the first unifying terrain in politics of the new European nation state. The first example after the schism brought about by the Reformation of the European unification.
Yeah, no, it wasn't a political initiative, at least not in the modern sense that you're meaning. It was primarily a theological initiative, because the church at this time had a hell of a lot of institutional sway and was basically a second organ of what you could call a state. There is a slight issue here when you consider the fact that in the British Isles, which were the latest to the party when it came to the witch trials, witchcraft was considered a civic offense or a civil offense rather than a theological one, which is why people in the British Isles suffered hanging rather than burning, because burning was reserved for alleged theological crimes, whereas hanging was reserved for basically anything above a misdemeanor, anything you could call in modern terms like a felony or a civic offense. For the longest time, the main way of dealing with those were hanging. For example, I believe the threshold for constituting major theft in the British Isles around this time was either $2 or $5 worth of theft that would qualify you for hanging. Now, mind you, inflation, This was the late 15th and early, or the late 17th and early 18th centuries we're dealing with here. So keep in mind what $2 worth of merchandise could have bought back then. But yeah, all civil or civic offenses above a misdemeanor were cause for hanging in the British Isles. So there might be some argument for specifically the British the British specific witch trial, the British portion of the Burning Times, but that's even tinged with theological woo-woo because King James was a paranoid motherfucker who blamed witches and demons for goddamn everything. Anyway, moving on.
Devil belief in the mode of production. The first insight into the meaning of the European witch hunt can be found in the thesis proposed by Michael Lustig in his classic work Devil and Commodity Fetishism in South America, 1980, where the author maintains that devil beliefs arise in those historical periods when one mode of production is being supplanted by another.
That is entirely framework-based conjecture. There is no historical evidence for any of that. That is purely a conjecture-based a conjecture-based hypothesis, basically. For all that you can post hoc rationalize that in the modern day, that has nothing to do with what the people actually can be demonstrated to have believed at the time. And when you are dealing with historical events and historical cultures, or historical subcultures even, it is best to at least start from figuring out what people actually believed by examining their own quotes or their own summations of same. And if you try to post hoc rationalize or post hoc find a utilitarian reasoning behind why they believe things, you are very, very obligated to at least start from examining what people actually are said to have believed. If you don't, then that is just you projecting whichever lens suits your motives and your Overton window onto these people when they would have had no conception of anything like that. Moving on.
Okay. In such periods, not only are the material conditions of life radically transformed, but so are the metaphysical underpinnings of the social order. For instance, the conception of how value is traded, what generates life and growth, what is natural, and what is antagonistic to the established customs and social relations.
Baseless post hoc conjecture, which I dismiss entirely because it has no basis in actual history or in the beliefs of actual historical people. Not only because there is no evidence that the people in question believed those things, but moreover, this notion of material conditions and means of production comes specifically from a Hegelian-derived variation which Marx and Engels ran with, almost 2 centuries after these events would have taken place. And you can have your lenses of history all you like, but it is very, very important that you not confuse or conflate your lens through which you are viewing history or your interpretation of history and the history in and unto itself. If you want to know what these people actually believed, you need to look at documentations and evidence contemporaneous to the time and or the philosophical frameworks and metaphysical frameworks of the time. and or how they relate to human universals like evolutionary psychology or some standard of rationalistic human behavior. Like, you cannot use a framework that came about 2 centuries hence from the period you're talking about and act like this was something that affected these people's lives when they didn't know it. Which, no, you can't do that. Even sociologically or anthropologically, you're supposed to look at what these people what the information these people had access to versus what they didn't have access to. And nothing about the information they wouldn't have had access to at the time implies Marxist analysis. That is entirely a concoction and an ideological one of your own devising. And even then, Marx is just derivative from Hegel, who frankly owes quite a lot of debt to Rousseau, who themselves are about a century different from the Burning Times. So there's only so much post hoc rationalization can gleam about what these people thought or how they behaved anyway. But certainly you don't get to project ideological presuppositions as though those ideological presuppositions are fact, or as though they would have affected these people regardless of whether or not they knew it. Moving on.
Tostig developed his theory by studying the beliefs of Colombian agricultural laborers and... Sorry. Hold on. Okay, I'm going to reread that because I yawned and missed something. Tostig developed his theory by studying the beliefs of Colombian agricultural laborers and Bolivian tin miners at a time when in both countries monetary relations were taking root that in people's eyes seemed deadly and even diabolical, compared with the older and still surviving forms of substance-oriented production. Thus, in the cases Tostig studied, it was the poor who expected the better off of devil worship. Still, his association between the devil and the commodity form reminds us that also in the background of witch hunt there was the expansion of rural capitalism, which involved the abolition of customary rights and the first inflationary wave in modern Europe.
Capitalism is not some invented system that is applied to society post hoc. Capitalism is an emergent phenomenon that was emergent well into the feudal period. Capitalism and barter are only differentiated in the common parlance by the fact that barter features the thing to be traded directly, whereas monetary or capitalistic trade features an intermediary signifier, i.e. money. So all of this production-based nonsense is you post hoc rationalizing 2 centuries at least behind the times what they might have thought if they were Marxists. And they weren't. There are many different philosophies that populated Europe and the rest of the world during the space of history we refer to as the Burning Times, but capitalism had very little to do with anything, and Marxism wasn't even a glint in Marx's eye or even a glint in Hegel's eye when these Burning Times were occurring. So you cannot use a Marxist lens or even a Hegelian lens to post hoc rationalize the Burning Times. Or I guess you can, but it's not going to be intellectually honest or empirically defensible for you to do so. If we're being good anthropologists in this particular microsecond, the best way of looking at it is to ask yourself, what did these people believe? What presuppositions were they acting upon while they were doing these things? But we do actually have quite a staggering amount of trial transcripts and diary entries to elucidate exactly the same. Not to mention the commentaries on same done by scholars and clergy at the time, or as near to the time as we can reasonably get. Hence, we know what these people thought and why they did the things they did, at least to some degree. There is some argument as to a medical perspective, i.e., the ergot poisoning or like hemlock poisoning based theory of history, where part of the reason they saw the things they saw might have been because they were all stoned off their ass because they didn't know that certain types of mold on wheat would yield psychedelic phenomena. But that is about as far as you can go. And yes, you can, I guess, take a classist analysis in the sense that very often it was rich, powerful people accusing people who were the social misfits of the time, or the people who, um, didn't have the highest class and therefore seemed like a weirdo or an outlier. Or you could make an argument for people using the witch trials as an excuse to social and financially ladder climb, i.e., if someone has the largest farm in the state or whatever, you accuse them, then their property gets seized because they're engaging in immoral and illegal activity, and then if you wait long enough, the holding will lapse, and then someone else can buy it. So there is a classist or financial element to this, I suppose, but it's not a Marxist one. It's not a ersatz capitalistic or anti-capitalistic one, and the notion of material conditions um, or focus on labor and production that you're trying to pull here is so removed from the mindset of a 16th or 17th century peasant, or even a 16th or 17th century scholar, that to use it is frankly farcical. It's like talking about the petroleum or the oil industry in the context of the Roman Empire. Sure, you can, I suppose, say that they did have petroleum products or oil-based products in the Roman Empire, but to say that that's anything like the post 19th century uh, rush for black gold is frankly farcical. Well, it's just as farcical to project Marx and Engels and Hegel onto the burning times. If you want to know why they did things or how this phenomena operated, you need to at least look at the time and find things that are adjacent to the time or the framework that these people actually operated in to some degree. Moving on.
Right, okay. Uh, These phenomena only led to the growth of poverty, hunger, and social dislocation. But they also transferred power into the hands of a new class of modernizers who looked with fear and repulsion at the communal forms of life that have been typical of pre-capitalist Europe. It was by the initiative of this proto-capitalist class that the witch hunt took off, as a weapon by
Uh,
which against the social and economic restructuring could be defeated.
my sweet, there is no such thing as pre-capitalist Europe. As I have said many times at this point, capitalism is not like socialism or Marxism. It is not a deliberately created economic or societal framework. Capitalism is an emergent phenomenon that was discovered by people like Adam Smith, not because he was trying to figure out how to run society, but because he wanted to know how society was already, unbeknownst to most people, already being run. Feudalism and capitalism were not distinct things. There were moneylenders in feudal Europe, just like there were moneylenders in capitalist Europe. The Knights Templar were quite viscerally tortured because they were so prolific at the alleged sin of usury that literal kings owed money to them. One of the reasons the Knights Templar were murdered in mass was because the French king owed a shit ton of money to the Grand Master of the Knights Templar Order, and he basically used any given excuse to drum them out of society and have them all burnt or tortured or hung. So capitalism and feudalism, not incompatible, nor were they foreign concepts contemporaneous to each other. So to say that there was such a thing as pre-capitalist Europe, I guess you could make an argument that barter was not exactly capitalism, again, because capitalism requires a monetary system that has an intermediary signifier. But even then, if you look at barter, barter is motivated primarily by transaction, which once again leads to the invisible hand of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations fame. So the only thing that really differentiates what we call barter from what we call capitalism, in this sense that you're trying to thread this needle, is barter has no signifier, or rather no intermediary signifier. The things to be traded are synonymous with themselves, whereas capitalism requires an intermediary signifier, usually some kind of money or currency. And once again, even the Romans had currency. So even well prior to the Middle Ages and the feudal system, there was what you could reasonably call capitalism. Moving on.
That's sort of rule capitalism with all its consequences and
Exploitation, maybe?
No, there's no L in there.
Okay. I guess just keep going. We'll figure it out from context.
The action by the state on the authority of taking property from its owner of the public use to benefit.
Oh, expropriation.
Okay.
There we go. That's the word. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know how I did not know how to say that. So.
Yeah. Expropriation is that word.
Okay.
It means when governments seize property from people, or when property is taken away from people, basically. And yeah, they did expropriate the property of accused witches or other heretics during the burning times.
The breakdown of social relations is a decisive factor in the background of the witch hunt is also proven by the fact that a majority of those accused were poor peasant women, voters, wage laborers, while those who accused them were wealthy and prestigious members of the community, often their employers or landlords, that is, individuals who were part of the local power structures and often had close ties with the central state.
Okay, once again, the state as you would define it didn't exist at this time. The closest thing that they had to a state was the aristocracy. And even then, quite a lot of the witch hysteria came out of the church. So it was more theocratic than aristocratic for the most part. Also, quite a lot of the accusers of the alleged witches were women, specifically upper class women, or the upper part of the emerging middle class at the time, because the middle class didn't really exist until the end of feudalism and the beginning of the modern period, when merchants basically amassed enough wealth to buy their way into the aristocracy. But that is the kind of classist analysis that you should be giving. For some reason, you are giving a complete detour into Marxian or Marxist analysis and feminist analysis, because you keep perpetuating this lie that witch trials were somehow majoritarily a women's issue, just because roughly 60% of the accused of witchcraft are women, and that's even excluding the male-specific varieties of sorcery like werewolfism and, lycanthropy and vampirism that more men were accused in, or the general heresy accusations, which men outnumber women to a quite ludicrous degree. So yeah, even in the context of the alleged classist analysis you're supposed to be doing, Marxism should feature nowhere in it, and feminism should feature nowhere in it. If you want to have a conversation about the actual classism at play during the witch trials, we can have an actual conversation about the actual classism at play during the witch trials. But you can leave your 2 centuries distant Marxism at the door, and you can leave your 3 centuries distant feminism at the door when we're actually supposed to be talking about classism. Because the title of this piece is supposed to be witch trials and classism. Hence, at the very least, I'm going to hold you to a classist analysis, which means no Marx and no feminism. But for some reason, you feel the need to bring Marxian analysis and feminist analysis into a piece which you yourself titled Witch Trials and Classism for some reason. You don't need Marx to talk about class. You don't need feminism to talk about class. Class can be talked about in an actual historically accurate context by talking about the aristocracy and or the emerging merchant classes and or the caste system of classes during this period. But for some reason you don't want to focus on that and you want to bring Marx and feminism into it for some reason. Moving on.
In England, the witches were usually old women on public assistance or women who survived by going from house to house begging for bits of food or a pot of wine or milk. If they were married, their husbands were day laborers, but more often they were widows and lived alone. Their poverty stands out in the confession. It was in times of need that the devil appeared to them to assure them that from now on they would never want, although the money he would give them on such occasions would soon turn to ashes, a detail perhaps related to the experience of superinflation common at the time.
Okay, fair enough. This is at least something regarding this is at least something approaching a classist analysis. Yes, a lot of the accused, especially later on in the period, when they ran out of actual witches to accuse, or actual self-professed witches to accuse, were the poor and the ugly-looking, because the thought was, in the medieval mind, ugliness on the outside denoted ugliness on the inside, and beauty on the outside denoted beauty on the inside. It was a conflation of, if you are beautiful, you must be morally pure, and if you are ugly, you must be morally impure. Which is something that you could actually talk about in a classist sort of way, if you were actually willing to engage with the historical material instead of hyper-theorizing about things that have nothing to do with anything. I don't think inflation had anything to do with anything, though, because inflation is a thoroughly modern concept. And by the way, the alleged government assistance you're talking about was mostly charity, done by churches and other non-government affiliated institutions. The workhouses and the publicly funded organizations didn't really happen until the 19th century, 2 centuries after the Burning Times. Moving on.
Right. As for the diabolical crimes of the witches, they appear to us as nothing more than the class struggle played out at the village level. The evil eye, the curse of the beggar to whom an aim has been refused, the default on the payment of rent, the demand of public assistance.
Okay, here again, you've lost the plot a little bit, because here's the problem. There were actual people who claimed to be witches. They were the village wise women and the village cunning folk that existed shortly after the conversion to Christianity and were a holdover from previously existing polytheistic times. So, yes, while especially later in the Burning Times, it did devolve into just neighbors sniping at neighbors, largely for cynical profit motives or you don't fit into society motives. There was at least, to begin with, a cast of people who were village wise women or cunning folk who actually could meaningfully be called something like real witches or real wizards. And once again, this is why these kind of ideological lenses really nerf your ability to engage with material, because you refuse to engage with the material as a thing in itself, and you constantly find ways of inventing post hoc rationalizations. Like, oh, no one ever actually believed in this shit, it was just classism. Or, oh, no one ever actually believed in this shit, it was just misogyny. Or no, it was never anyone actually believing in the shit. It was just social cohesion. No. While those factors largely secondary or brainstormers internet crapped out.
What? Well,
I assume your internet crapped out because it did the buffering thing.
not fine. It's working right now.
Okay, well then maybe that one was on my end. Okay, it's doing it again. What the shit? Did you hear the rant I just went on for like the last 3 minutes?
Say one more time. You just out for me.
Did you hear the rant I just went on for like the last 3 minutes, or did it get broken up? Do I need to repeat it again?
I was hearing it. I heard it. I don't really have anything to say.
Okay, so long as it got recorded for the thing. I was just afraid that the buffering cut me off and that we would need to repeat it.
Just to be safe, I will run. I'll check the YouTube real quick to make sure.
Okay. As long as the actual rant got through, then we can move on. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, we good. We're good. So moving on then.
Yes.
But yeah, it went through. You good on that? You're fine.
Okay.
Okay.
As long as it didn't cut me off. Good.
Yeah. Witch hunting and class revolt. As we can see from these cases, the witch hunt grew in a social environment where the better sorts were living in constant fear of the lower classes, who would certainly be expected to harbor evil thoughts because in this period they were losing everything they had. That this fear expressed itself as an attack on popular magic is not surprising. The battle against magic has always accompanied the development of capitalism to this very day. Magic
Okay,
is
but
hold on. I want to finish. I want to finish the last part too. Hopefully, magic is premised on the belief that the world is animated, unpredictable, and that there is force in all things, so that every event is interpreted as the expression of occult power that must be deciphered and bent in one's will. So,
okay, bitch, you just stepped into my wheelhouse, and now you deserve what is coming to you. Magic has nothing. Okay, I was going to say magic has nothing to do with capitalism, but more to the point, magic and capitalism are never or have never been at odds. Some of the most common forms of magic are prosperity-based magic. One of the most popular sort of fields of magical study in the Middle Ages and the early modern period was treasure hunting, because the thought was those powers that held sway over the underground, be they fae, be they gods, be they demons, etc., would know where to find precious metals. Hence, you could use magic or working with spirits to find treasure. It was one of the most common vectors of employment for someone who did use magic, be they just a dabbler who was conning people, or be they someone who took it more seriously. There are still to this day grimoires, and they are fortunately being translated and are purchasable, that focus specifically on treasure magic. I own one of them. It's called if I can actually look at my shelf here. Wrong shelf. What is it? Oh, the current title for it is called The Book of Treasure Spirit. It was translated by David Rankin. It's one of the few books of spells that actually features how to work with a dragon in it. But my point is, this idea of putting magic at odds with capitalism is complete and utter bunk. Not to mention that many of the people, especially in the 19th century, that engaged in magic were well-to-do upper-class gentry. And to be fair, that was also somewhat true in the Middle Ages as well. But broader to the point, as to your description of magic, I will give you most of what you said there, because most of what you said there is defensible. The thing is, the word I will take special umbrage with is the word unpredictable. Magic only works on the premise that things are predictable, that rituals do have a mechanical and practical effect on the world, that spirits can be summoned and bargained with in an orderly, rational manner. So, not to mention that the natural sciences that everyone so lauds today, all came to varying degrees out of the magics, because what people don't want to acknowledge is magic is not about the unseen or the unknown or the unpredictable or the irrational. Magic is about the fact that even things which are not scientifically verifiable or scientifically or I guess pertaining to the scientific realm of reality are still operating on rational mechanical bases. Neoplatonic magic, animistic magic, all of these rely on a mechanical, rationalistic view of basically the entirety of reality functioning as one giant Rube Goldberg machine. While some of the magical procedures might seem counterintuitive, they all operate on the basic assumption of causality, which is rational and straightforward to some degree, if not necessarily scientific. And you just committed one of the biggest fallacies in the modern world, the idea that you have to be scientific to be rational, or that you can't have rationality without science. This is simply not true, as evidenced by the fact that it was the rationality of the magics that ultimately eventually led to the birth of the natural sciences. The occult sciences are what led to the birth of the natural sciences, and I will not have magic be disreputed in this way. Magic is rational. It's just not scientific. There are more kinds of rationality than science. Period. Fuck off. Moving forward.
So, hello, Giant Turtle. Honestly, you're not wrong about it not feeling like Sunday. I think it's more accurate to say the separation wasn't there before. Or last week, the downtown legend mentioned that now it's time to downtown science is maybe next is on the chaos maybe.
And that, well, okay, you're half right, Dragon Turtle. There was always a distinction between the natural sciences and the occult sciences, but they in the medieval period especially were thought to feed into each other. And actually, it was an alchemist by the name of Isaac Newton who made it his mission to separate the two. And there's a significant argument to be made for the fact that he was trying to operate by alchemical principles when he did so. Because one of the principles of alchemy is the idea that separation precedes conjunction. So in order for someone to find the defined connections between the natural sciences and the occult sciences, they must have first been separated. But that's just by the by. That's a different conversation entirely. But yeah, there was always at least some distinction between the natural sciences and the occult sciences. The only people who didn't make that distinction were people who were uneducated, usually on both, or who had a power game axe to grind with the magics or the sciences, because the magics and the sciences both undermine the moral and theological authority of the church. Hence why most of the documents we have criticizing both magic and science in the Middle Ages were theological tracts basically whining, how dare you say you have knowledge that goes beyond what the church has or what morality pertains to? Grr. How dare you say that the metaphysical or the physical can be viewed in rational terms as something that can be dealt with by an individual rather than under the omnipresent authority of my God? Now, mind you, quite a lot of those people also were, in their free time, magical practitioners, because the hypocrisy of authority figures has never ever been understated. But,
Moving on. Moving on.
Yep, moving on.
All right. Magic is also an obstacle to the rationalization of the work process and a threat to the establishment of the principle of individual responsibility. Above all, magic seemed a form of refusal of work, of insubordination, and an instrument of grassroots resistance power. The world had to be disenchanted in order to be dominated.
Fuck you. A ritual is okay. This is me going into my particular approaches to magic, and Chrono, I'm sure, will disagree with me until the end of fucking time. But that's a conversation that we can have at some other time. But in my perspective, magical rituals are a kind of machine. They are a kind of engine. The only difference is, while you put mechanical or sometimes chemical and or electromagnetic energy into a machine to make it work, the energy you are relying on for a magical ritual is life energy. It was called chi by the Chinese. It was called prana by the Hindus. It was called mana or miyama, mana by the Polynesians, miyama by some of the people in Africa, spiritus by the Romans, or spiritus vital by the Romans. I forget what the Greek term of it was, but essentially, all magic boils down to the extra-physical manipulation of life energy, and a magical ritual or a spell is a kind of machine. Now, there are varying degrees of complexity to those machines, just like there are varying degrees of complexity to any other kind of machine. Or, in some ways, a magical ritual can sometimes operate like an equation. You put variables into it, those variables usually coming from some form or other of said life energy, and then you get a mechanical result from that. And again, I realize this is my approach to magic, and there are plenty of magical practitioners, not just Chrono, who would disagree with me on this. But not only is my perspective the one that I think makes the most sense, although obviously I'm biased, but it is very similar to the kinds of approaches that they had in the Middle Ages. Read Agrippa, read Paracelsus, read Johannes Trithemius. The idea of magic being a causal mechanism that could have a practical impact on the world and therefore was bound by the same laws of logic as something like mathematics or the emerging natural sciences was a very, very common, very, very well-known thing. So stop acting like magic and rationality are at odds. Magic and science are to some degree at odds, or magic and the natural sciences are to some degree at odds, largely because partially of the smearing of the church and of the egotistic isolationism of the scientists. But that does not mean that magic and rationality are at odds, because science is not the only goddamn mechanism for rationality. Mathematics is a non-scientific form of rationality, and it worked perfectly fucking fine. And yet for some reason, the idea of magic being rational, just not scientific, rubs every motherfucker the wrong way, for reasons that I have yet to take seriously in any way whatsoever. Okay, moving on.
By the 16th century, the attack against magic was well underway, and women were its most likely target. Even when they were not expert sorcerers/magicians, they were the ones who were called to mark animals when they fell sick, heal their neighbors, help them find lost or stolen objects, give them amulets or potions to help them forecast their future. Though the witch hunt targeted a broad variety of female practices, it was above all in this capacity, as sorcerers, healers, performers of incantations and divinations, that women were persecuted, for their claims to magical power undermined the power of the authorities and the state, giving confidence to the poor in their ability to manipulate the natural and social environment and possibly subvert the constituted order.
Okay, I will give it to you for acknowledging the existence of wise women and village shamanesses. However, once again, the ratio of men to women in the witch trials was 60-40, which yes is biased in women's disfavor in this instance, but 40% of accused is not a small number, my dear, and it was any form of magic or any form of spirituality that was oppositional to the church's authority that was accused. It wasn't, oh, my women's issue, oh, my misogyny. There were plenty of cunning folk who were also accused in the same way, And while it was less common because they used the authority of the church against itself in a lot of ways, or they used the authority of the church to shield themselves in a lot of ways, there were plenty of college-educated magic users too that got accused. I mean, hell, the guy, I believe the guy who actually wrote the Munich Necromancer's Manual was accused of sorcery at one point. Now, mind you, that's a bad example because I'm pretty sure he got off. But my point is, it didn't matter if you were upper class, lower class, sideways class, whatever, in the Middle Ages. If you proposed magic as a more sound and rational alternative to spirituality than the church would come after your ass to varying degrees. Whether you could skate past it quickly enough, or you could use the church's own dogma against itself well enough, was mostly completely incidental and completely random. What mattered was magic was a day-to-day practical spirituality that actually had, for all intents and purposes, practical outcomes, and therefore its practice undermined the church, because the church was all about bureaucracy, moral and intellectual authority, and of course morality. So if you were a person who did engage with spirituality but didn't care about things like morality and bureaucratic hierarchies, and therefore you just wanted something tangible that you could actually use, your ass was on someone's chopping block or under someone's pyre, or over someone's pyre, as and when the case may be. But it was all magic and all magic practitioners that eventually got the shit end of this particular stick. Said stick then being lit on fire or used to hold a rope, depending. But yeah, no, it wasn't a women's issue, and there were plenty of lower class male sorcerers or cunning folk that got the shit end of this particular stick too. And to some degree, it wasn't even particularly classist, because if a person of high class delved too deeply into magic for the church's liking, they would get the shit beat out of them too. So you can miss me with all of that bullshit, but thank you for at least acknowledging that there were actual practitioners involved. Moving on.
It's the same one we were covering last week against Finish Dragon Pearl. Ironically, it talks more about something that wasn't actually about the actual article, which is about which the actual title of the article is "Witches and Classism." And
yeah.
Classism, not classism, but
yeah. But it doesn't really. It does occasionally give lip service to classism, but it then usually takes that classism into a Marxist lens or a feminist lens. And you can guess how much that pisses me off, because there is actual meat on the bone if you want to talk about just, the witch trials and classism. But instead of just talking about classism as it actually would have affected the witch trials, it decided to go full Marxist in several places and talk about material conditions and, of course, labor. Or it went even further afield from its mandate and went the full feminist route of witch trials were women's issue, don't you know? Hence why I'm angry.
By the way, we're almost done with it, kind of.
Yeah, and then it will be the second half of the Lotus Eaters video that we will cover then.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it is doubtful.
Moving forward.
Yeah, it is doubtful, on the other hand, that the magical art that women had practiced for generations would have been magnified into a demonic conspiracy had they not occurred against the background of an intense social crisis and struggle. These were the peasant wars against land privatization, including uprisings against the enclosures in England in 1649, 1603, 1628. No, 1607, 1628, 1631, when hundreds of men, women, and children armed with pitchforks and spades set out about destroying the fences erected around the commons, proclaiming that from now on we needed work anymore. During these revoked, it was also women who initiated and led the action. The persecution of witches grew on this ring. It was class war carried out by other means.
While there were certainly class elements to the witch trials, especially later on when they ran out of actual practitioners to accuse and or got so hysterical that they were willing to take non-practitioners as practitioners because they didn't know any better, and it did devolve into neighbor against neighbor bullshit, it has nothing to do with the emergence of macapitalism or some kind of class warfare. The class warfare, insofar as it existed, was a later addition and incidental to the fact that people actually believed this shit. Also, once again, you are completely and utterly marginalizing the men who were victims of this, and the village sorcerers who were not female, and even the upper class practitioners who were accused in the same way. Because frankly, it didn't matter which kind of magic you were offering as an alternative to the dominant moral zeitgeist of the church. If you were claiming to have more spiritual knowledge or authority than the church, your ass was going over a pyre or hanging under a tree, depending on which country you were in and what the current rationale for what to do with you was. Not to mention all the people who were drowned because of the whole swimming the witch phenomena. But that's a sidebar within a sidebar. My point is that plenty of men, some of whom were known as cunning folk, which were like the male equivalents of the village witch, or the upper class, more book educated sorcerer, were accused of these crimes. So please, for the love of God, stop trying to take something which is a sign of misanthropy and ideological possession and turn it into strictly classism and misogyny. It is not those things. Classism was a sidebar to the witch trials, but it will only ever be a sidebar to the fact that people had irrational beliefs and irrational fears about this thing, stoked by the church and or amplified by the church because they didn't like questioning phenomena, questioning their authority, and they actually proceeded rationally within the context of this broken premise. They may have started with a premise that was completely foobar and or proposed for selfish or theocratic reasons, but for the most part, most people took those irrational premises and then proceeded to do at least nominally rational things with them. But because they started from a broken, irrational premise, mass hysteria and bloodlust was the result. And it would be absolutely excellent if we could address the mass hysteria and the bloodlust, or the inherent irrationality of the starting premise, but we can't do either of those things because you have an ideological axe to grind. Do carry on.
Moving on.
Yep.
Witch hunting, woman hunting, and the accumulation of labor. It is plausible that the witch hunt was, at least in part, an attempt to criminalize birth control and place the female body, the uterus, at the service of population increase and the production and accumulation of labor. Okay.
What?
Okay, so at first I thought, in some way, yeah, it was getting off topic, but at the very least, it was somewhat congruent. But now we've just really spiraled into whatever the fuck this idiot was thinking of at the time.
Basically, okay. While there is something you could reasonably call birth control in the Middle Ages, it was sometimes called bitter water. And yes, you would sometimes go to the village witch to get said bitter water if you couldn't get it from the church or the official channels. To say that the witch trials had anything at all to do with birth control is so much a 21st century first world problem reflavoring of history. I can't even begin to explain how she got from there to there beyond she literally cannot see how the 17th and 18th centuries were different from the 21st. in any way whatsoever. Because the Supreme Court phenomena happened recently about, you know, overturning Roe v. Wade, she thinks now post hoc that birth control had something to do with the witch trials. Ugh. Hey,
So
moving on.
we can, in fact, imagine what effect it had on women to see their neighbors, friends, and relatives being burned at the stake, or hanged, or drowned, or whatever, and realize that any contraceptive initiative on their side might be construed as the product of a demonic perversion.
I no. There was some hysteria about witches stealing babies or sacrificing them or eating them or what have you, but the phenomena of the like the anti the anti-contraceptive or the again, at the time it was usually referred to as the bitter water. um the idea that that particular practice of some village wise women and or cunning folk had major amounts to do with why the church was so afraid of witches and you know, the hysteria over the, you know, taking of babies and so on, which there is no evidence they actually did. That was mostly dehumanizing propaganda, because a lot of people who were also the village shaman or the village midwife, or yeah, the village shaman or the village witch were also the village midwife or the informal apothecary slash doctor. Hence, when a child um would unfortunately die of natural causes, as was common in the Middle Ages, because the Middle Ages were gonna middle age, um, it was often thought that it was somehow the midwife and slash witch's fault, which is unfortunate. Can at least see where they went with that. And then of course the church seized on that fear and did exactly what they did later with the Jews, or somewhat contemporaneously with the Jews, and went, only the most subhuman demons ever possible would do anything bad to children, therefore we can use the fact that sometimes people who are midwives lose a child while they're seeing to the mother as a hysterical bullshit thing about how witches take babies and sacrifice them and shite. Again, this is partly the church's own um, attempt to consolidate power, partly the unfortunate results of the fact that the Middle Ages were the Middle Ages, and sometimes you lost a baby no matter how good your midwife was, and partly the thought that if you could heal and or administer to children with potions and herbs and shite, if you were a malefic witch, you could also do harm to them with same. But this had nothing to do with your modern fixation on abortion because Roe v. Wade got overturned, my dear. I'm sorry, but the 17th and 18th century were a long ass time ago for you, and the 20th century cannot be post hoc one-to-one mapped onto them. Like, I know human beings haven't really changed much since then, but society and the issues plaguing it sort of have a bit. Moving on.
Right, right. Give me one sec. From this point of view, there can be no doubt that the witch hunt destroyed the methods that women have used to control procreation by indicting, no, indicting, no,
I think it is indicting.
in indicting,
Yeah, indicting. I think.
indicting. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna look this up real quick because it is gonna bug me if I get it wrong. I feel like a jackass. Um, Formerly accused of or charged with a serious crime. Okay, so yeah, indicted. Huh.
Mhm.
Was the sea silent or something?
Um, I have no freaking idea. Anyway, moving on.
Okay, sorry. Let me restart that. From this point of view, there can be no doubt that the witch hunt destroyed the methods that women had used to control procreation by indicting them with diabolical devices and institutionalized the state's control over the female body, the precondition for subordination, the reproduction of labor power. The witch hunt, then, as a war against women, it was a conceited, concerted, no, concerted, concerted attempt to degrade them, dehumanize them, and destroy their social power.
Okay, here's the thing again. This is yet another case of you're looking at misanthropy and seeing only misogyny, because apparently misandry is incidental to you. Um, the church claimed basic ownership over everyone's body. 1 Corinthians 7 verse 4 and 5. A man leaves his uh a man is supposed to leave his family or his mother and cleave to his wife, and a woman is supposed to leave the custodianship of her father and cleave to her husband, which ultimately leads to the idea that neither men nor women own their bodies, and their bodies are owned by someone else. And both the husband and the wife are supposed to be subservient to the church. In other words, this is a way of the church dehumanizing fucking everyone, and yet for some reason you only see it as and when it pertains to women. Because again, apparently men are just immaterial to your moral consideration. And it fucking pisses me off. But more to the point, as I said last week, the main reason why women were more often accused than men was because in the medieval mind, i.e., the people who were doing this shit, they believed that witchcraft was an extension of the sin of lust, and that it was specifically a misuse of the vital spark of creation that resulted in procreation. It was basically a misuse of your biological generative impulse. But women were A, considered more morally pure by default than men, and B, they were considered to have a stronger generative impulse because they were the one that fed the children. Hence, because women were both considered more pure and more powerful than men in sexual regards, it was thought that the devil, a male figure, need I remind you, would would play on the naivete of pure, innocent women and get them to misuse their generative impulse in the form of witchcraft. However, once again, etymologically, the word witch just traces back to a word which means wise. The word warlock, very much on the other hand, though, specifically meant oathbreaker in the most literal interpretation, or traitor in the more colloquial sense. Because the thought process was when a woman signed her soul over to the devil, which is what the church believed happened in the case of witchcraft, um, it was thought that she was tricked into it, whereas a man, being a possessor of agency, was entirely blameful for his action because it was thought that he betrayed his implicit and inherent oath to God. So he was blamed as a warlock or traitor / oathbreaker, whereas a woman was basically viewed as mostly blameless and innocent in her actions, and so we need to burn or hang her in this life so that she need not suffer in the next one. But that guy we're going to burn and torture because he deserves it, don't you know? Not to mention that very often it was thought in the medieval mind that male sorcerers led their hives or covens of witches. Hence, when men were accused of the exact same crimes that women were accused of, they got worse punishments. Because, as so usual, women and men accused of the same crime, the woman gets off lighter than the man. Not to mention that very often a woman could get off from her conviction by either getting pregnant already having been pregnant, or some of the time, the very act of a woman being able to get pregnant was a exculpatory piece of evidence, because the thought process, at least in the later witch trials, was because witchcraft or maleficia was a misuse of the sexual generative impulse, a woman who was engaging in witchcraft couldn't get pregnant. Hence, some of the time, a woman would get off from the witch accusation simply by demonstrating either that she was pregnant already or that she could get pregnant. Moving on.
When this task was accomplished, when social discipline was restored, and the ruling class saw its hegemony, no, I know this word. I've read it. I've seen that word.
It's either hegemony or hegemony. Both are technically correct.
Hegemony consolidated. Witch trials came to an end. The belief in witchcraft could even become an object ridiculed, decried as a superstition, and soon put out of memory, just as the state had started the witch hunt. So too, one by one, various governments took the initiative in India.
Okay, I will give you half a point here for acknowledging the stupidity of witchcraft becoming an object of ridicule and basically just swept under the rug. This point I agree with you on. It should not have been. It was stupid that it was. Part of part of the blame goes to the emerging sciences, because they didn't have the data at the time to substantiate witchcraft, therefore they didn't think it existed. And that in and of itself isn't a damning indictment, but the fact that they never revisit that supposition ever is, even in the modern day. Moving on.
Okay. 2 paragraphs left. Once the subversive
Bless you.
Thank you. Once the subversive potential of witchcraft was destroyed, the practice of magic should even be allowed to continue. After the witch hunt came to an end, many women continued to support themselves by foretelling the future, showing charms, and practicing other forms of magic. But now the authorities were no longer interested in persecuting these practices, being inclined instead to view witchcraft as a product of ignorance or a disorder of the imagination.
Yeah, that part is not because my state or my power structure or anything. It's specifically because of the emergence of the nascent natural sciences, and they basically, honestly, they were partially trying to let people off of the witch hysteria, and they obviously were also trying to decry it as irrational. As you can imagine, I disagree with at least the second half of that bit. However, funnily enough, even in this period when the nascent scientists, who were very often also religious, it must be said, were trying to get people off of the witch hysteria, it didn't exactly work. For example, one of the most famous books on this subject, Reginald Scott's The Discovery of Witchcraft, basically tried to calm people down by giving a thorough blow-by-blow of how people practiced magic, and of course to argue that there was no possible way that any of this could work. But funnily enough, it actually kind of ended up being sort of used in the opposite way, insofar as it did accurately give a magical blow-by-blow of how to do magic. A lot of people, men and women, both, used the Discovery of Witchcraft as an instruction manual, to the point that it was later published in a later edition in 1666 with extra notes in it. Because people had been using it as an instruction manual, and as you might see with someone using a cookbook and finding different ways to do recipes and writing notes in it, there was an entire appendix in the 1666 version that was basically, I tried this spell this way and it seemed to work better. Now, mind you, that edition got buried rather quickly, and for the longest time, the only copy or the only edition of Discovery of Witchcraft you could find was the 19th century version, which had a hell of a lot of the spells actually cut out. Some of them were still left in, but quite a lot of the actual practical work was cut out. And only recently was a variation based on the 1666 version edited back in under the title The Magicians Discovered. The name of the author off the top of my head I don't remember, but he actually did basically a scholarly edition where he had one volume which was basically describing the history of the discovery of witchcraft and the various editions and its actual use as a magical text. A second volume that was literally, here's all the practical information and all the spell work that was cut out of other editions, and a third edition that went into the potential comparisons between Discovery of Witchcraft and other grimoires. I have yet to own a copy of any of these three editions, but there's an excellent video by a guy on YouTube called Foolish Fish where he goes into reviewing the Magicians Discovered, and someday I will own at least volume 2 because I don't really so much care about the scholarly input bit because I know quite a lot of that already, and I don't really care so much about comparing it with other grimoires, but I want the fucking practical notes that people left because I find it hilarious that he basically, Reginald Scott basically wanted to make a "This is why magic is bullshit" book, but he went into such great, and it must be said, intellectually honest detail that people basically started using it as a how-to manual. That's great. I love that so much.
Last paragraph. Yet the specter of the witches continued to haunt the imagination of the ruling class. In 1871, the Parisian bourgeois instinctively returned to demonize the female commonards, accusing them of wanting to see Paris aflame. There can be little doubt, in fact, that the models for the lurid tales and images used by the bourgeois press to create the myth of the Petroluses were drawn from the repertoire of the witch hunt.
Again, stop overemphasizing the ways in which women were affected by this. Literally everyone was affected by the church being overbearing at this time period, and men were almost as often accused of witchcraft as women were, not to mention that if you factor in other accusations like werewolfism and vampirism, the ratio actually gets reversed and it becomes a man-specific crime or a man-majority crime again. Not to mention all the other kinds of heresy for which men were the primary victims. Moving on, finally. And on to the Overseers being smug cunts again, because they always seem to be some variation on smug cunts.
Sorry, I didn't get things ready. So again, if you want to see the first half, is in podcast for Storm number 237, which was last week for us right now. And we are just going to start off where we left off, which was at 9:40 to 10. Or I think either that or I just backed it up so we have some content. And yeah, like Tom said, it's from the Lotus Eaters, Islamic Hogwarts. For background, just again,
jack-o'-lanterns.
Well, no, Don, what is the best way we can kind of like give a brief rundown of everything we've covered so
far? Basically, they're being smug about a university that has a subcategory within either a religious studies or maybe anthropology degree, which focuses on Islamic sorcery. Now, mind you, I will agree with the Lotus Eaters in some sense that this is probably smuggled in under the rubric of social justice somehow, or tainted with social justice somehow, and that's bullshit because I think magic is a worthwhile enough study that it should stand on its own 2 feet and shouldn't be inculcated into anyone's fucking morality. But most of their smugness and most of their attempts at humor, although failed, are teehee people still believe in magic for some reason.
Oh, and I will also be muting myself because I have been made aware that there is an echo with both my mics that catches the speaker. So, jack-o'-lanterns?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
We have moved beyond the realms of lunacy, but I like looking at opportunities. I don't like looking at negativity. I want positive stuff. So I still want you to not be disincentivized to pursue this degree, because there are plenty of reasons why.
Because of course, anti-racism and decolonization are just topics so close to my heart, you know.
Yeah. So
I agree. Social justice has no place here. Magic should stand on its own 2 feet. Magic should be a study pursued for its own sake and on its own terms, and shouldn't be a political weapon for fucking anybody. I have made no bones about the idea that I am much like Six Hexenhammer, otherwise known as Tor Warwick. I am an anti-SJW, but I am also a magical practitioner with 17 plus years of experience in magic and the occult, and that includes magic from various cultures. So yeah, no, I do agree with the make magic anti-social justice again, or make magic apolitical again, because again, I don't think magic needs any political or ideological window dressing to make itself worth pursuing or valid. I think it can stand on its own 2 feet. And I am somewhat grateful that academia is finally rolling around to that position. Unfortunately, it's also inculcating it with social justice bullshit, and social justice is irrational moralistic hysteria and needs to get the fuck out. Anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
So basically, what is going to happen? You're going to be a very spellbinding candidate. You're going to have good skills that will be analytical. You will become flexible and agile. And also, I want to say, because I searched a bit the research output.
I know he's trying to be sarcastic and cheeky, but no, you actually do need to have quite a lot of erudition if you want to study magic, especially in this kind of academic context. You can get away with less if you're just focusing and fixating on like a particular variant of folk magic. But if you want to have a broader understanding of magic, You need at least a little bit of understanding of history. You need at least a little bit of understanding of religion. You need at least a little bit understanding of philosophy. You need at least a little bit of understanding of comparative frameworks, i.e., you need to be able to look at magic in various cultures and essentially see the commonalities between multiple different models. So, no, unironically, you will probably be intellectually agile if you study magic. Now, I'm sure people like this would just call that mental gymnastics, but frankly, you need more mental gymnastics at this point to dismiss at least the historical study of magic. Again, even if you don't believe in the efficacy of magic or the practicality of magic, which, again, I do. I've been studying magic for 17 freaking years. But even if you don't believe in the efficacy of magic or the practicality of magic, it still touches on so many elements within philosophy, within religion, within various cultures, within history, within the sciences, and so on, that to not at least be willing to engage with the material is maybe not silly, because I guess there are people who specialize in all kinds of different things. So you could hypothetically specialize in an area that didn't require you or didn't incentivize you to study that kind of stuff. But I think it's certainly more intellectually honest to at least engage with the material, because whether you believe in the efficacy of magic or not, whether you believe in the practicality of magic or not, it is still, along with science, religion, the arts, the humanities, etc., a field of study that is common in every culture or as near as every culture, and has impacted so much of the others, so much of the arts, so much of the sciences, so much of the humanities, that it at least deserves to be placed alongside them, even if you don't believe in the practicality or efficacy of same. Moving on. Jack-o'-lanterns.
There are plenty of good advice for sex. Yeah. So, for
Are
instance,
you suggesting I need that advice, Stelios?
I don't know,
Is
but
that what you're implying?
I was searching at the publication and the comments and the articles, and I found here a book. I think
I mean, considering that one of the, especially after Aleister Crowley, most popular forms of magic, at least in the 19th century, was sex magic, and lest we forget that the Kama Sutra, the famous, Hindu sex manual, was basically a book on various different forms of sex magic when you get right down to it in a Hindu religious context. Um, I mean, I didn't want to accept Chad points for studying magic, but okay, sure. If you want to unironically give magic credit for kinks related to sex magic, then okay, I'll take it. Moving on. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Before we do, I got something to say about that.
hmm
This took a weird turn.
No, it did. It did. He basically just tried to insult magic by saying it might get you laid, which I mean, for all that Gerald Gardner was a male feminist prick, it did work. Wicca was basically his attempt to found a magical sex cult, and he got much laid. So,
Yeah, I think a lot of people who would want that. So,
Mhm.
okay, but yeah, let me move real quick.
I will ask to review this book on a symposium. Most probably Carl will say no. It says the Sultan's sex potions, Arab aphrodisiacs in the Middle Ages. And I read here from the Amazon description. It says about, far from being the pursuit of prurient pornography.
Okay, while the sexual content really doesn't faze me much, that book does sound interesting. Like it's not like aphrodisiacs is a foreign thing to magic. So yeah, like unironically, I might like it's gonna be pretty far down my reading list because there's so many other books I want to get, but sure, I will probably add this to a reading list at some point. Anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
Yeah, I don't say I was kind of thinking it did, but no, I don't. Mutant and
Far from being the pursuit of prurient pornographers, eroticism and sexuality received it says it was devoted to aphrodisiacs as well as sexual stimulant practices and positions. So if you get good knowledge of
You seem to be confused why this exists, but again, to call back to something I said earlier, for most of human history, the village witch or the village cunning man was the informal healer, shaman, doctor, and apothecary. So, and for most of the Middle Ages, the shit you would get from the village apothecary was better than the shit you would get from a actual doctor who went to medical school, because it's not just on the Marvelous Misadventures of Flashback or Flapjack, but the relationship between doctoring and barbers was a little bit too close for comfort, and yes, bleeding of leeches and or amputation was very often a common prescription. So you probably in most of the Middle Ages would have been better off with the village witch and her herbal concoctions, or the village cunning man and his amulets, than you would the butchery of the educated medical doctor. To the point that Nostradamus was actually, long before the prophecies, was a village apothecary during the Black Plague, and he is known for being very effective at treating the Black Plague, even more effective than the doctors, and he literally dropped out of medical school to become a wandering apothecary. So, unironically, Chad, yes, to that. Moving on though, jack-o'-lanterns.
witchcraft, you might have some lack with potions as well. So they should put this as an advertisement for the degree.
You should do an Islamic sex potion review to let us all know, because we're all dying to know which Islamic sex potion is the best. Which one makes you the most potent, Stelios?
I almost want to see. I almost want to see them do it just to see Stelios' face when they get red pilled on. Wait, this actually works? The fuck?
So I also wanted to mention, because you brought up the example of Nostradamus.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of similar to what I was saying last week about how I personally view magic itself.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of how it's specifically stuff you explained to me, Dalton, and stuff. I'll be honest, a lot of things that is used today, I can see a lot of inspiration was taken from like various like magical systems and practices and stuff like that, including like medicine and things like that.
Yeah.
So I
Medicine, medicine, the culinary arts, the sciences. Yeah, it all touches magic somewhere.
yeah. So I just and well, I don't think these guys are aware of that or are and don't really give a shit.
Yeah, no, they're being smug.
Right. But I feel like there has to be some reverence or at least respect. Even if quote unquote it wasn't how to best phrase this. Scientifically sound, I guess, is the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
Um,
Even if the reasons why it worked are different than the reasons they thought it worked, what why would you just and this is something I've always been annoyed at ever since I started studying magic is like, how can you honestly tell me that the fact that the village apothecaries, herbal elixirs worked better than the, you know, medical school graduates' best practices isn't somehow historically or like intellectually significant? But
okay.
again, I am glad that academia at large seems to be coming around again to the like, if not being explicitly respectful for magic, at least considering it as something worth analyzing. I just wish we could have gotten there without the social justice need to subvert everything bullshit
Right.
along with it.
Giant Turtle, they dismissed it or claim it's demons if they are religious. Other religious is just one of those. It's a great social and moral institution.
Yeah, Dragon Turtle. It is very much that, and we will probably get into that because I know there's at least one moment where they said something that made my brain just immediately I need to kill this with fire, but we're not there yet, so we should get there. Jack-o'-lanterns.
The people need to know.
And also, think of this. Sometimes, competition is tough. Sometimes you have to get ahead of the curve. And, even if you go to apply for a job and you will stand out by having an MA in Islamic witchcraft, but maybe there will.
Again, the premise of this segment makes no logical sense to me. Either the resurgence of magical studies is so overblown that it's concerning and therefore we need to discuss it, or it's so niche as to be mockable and therefore we can make fun of it in a segment. Like, pick a side. Are you like morally and intellectually panicking because magic is on the rise again and that's some alleged, return to barbarism or return to irrationality or some shit? Or is this so niche that you're basically doing a comedy segment? Pick one. You can't have it both ways. Either magic and its resurgence are so indicative of a rise in irrationality, or it's so niche that this is basically a comedy segment. But you keep trying to have it both ways, and I don't think you understand how logic works. Either it's so commonplace now that it's concerning, which you could certainly go that route. I would still probably disagree, apart from the fact that it's laced with social justice, which is concerning. Or it's so niche that it's funny, hence let's laugh at it. You can't have it both ways, and you're trying to have it both ways, and it tells me that you didn't really think this segment through very well. Pick a side is all I'm saying. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Still be some doubts in the minds of the people who will interview you, because maybe some other candidates will have good other degrees. But I have a solution. We read here from the Sorcerer's Handbook, medieval Arabic magic in context.
Okay, this book I definitely need to get because there is not enough good Western material on Sahir. I mean, there are a couple really good ones, especially recently. There's one book called Jinn Sorcery by Rem al-Alam, which I'm dying to get my hands on. Which actually does even go into detail as to the connections between medieval Solomonic magic and Islamic magic. And there's another book called Summoning the Seven Jinn Kings, which is kind of from a left-hand path perspective, which from what I can tell, does or is supposed to do what it says on the tin. And I also want to get a copy of that. But so far, the only place I can find it is actually the only place I can actually find either of them is a website called Miskatonic Books, because the publisher Scarlet Imprint, I believe, is a European publishing company, and so the only place you can get it is from an American wholesaler like Miskatonic Books. But my point is that there isn't nearly enough good, solid material on the relationship between like Western magic and Sahir. So any book, any good, solid, anthropologically and practice wise books on Sahir are welcome, because while I certainly am fine with Solomonic magic, it is worth noting that while Solomonic magic is like one of the mainstays of Western ceremonial magic, I would like to compare and contrast the, like, for lack of a better word, pure undiluted Sahir and the Solomonic variations that made their way over here in the Middle Ages. So yeah, it is Islamic sorcery materials are good for me from a I want to use it someday perspective. Anyway, that's a complete sidebar. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Text. This was actually funded by the Leverhulme Foundation. So those of you who were in academia or who still are and have your applications declined by Leverhulme funding, please watch this and just ask yourself, how is academia going? That's a rhetorical question. I know you can give the answer. It says here.
Okay, there's an entire and actually quite prolific series of books published from an academic perspective. I forget which university publishes it, but the subtitle of the entire series is called Magic in History. There are a lot of really good books in there, which are basically a mixture of excerpts from the actual text and or like their operating procedures and like the academic history of same. Like my copy of or my excerpts from the Munich Necromancer's Manual that I have is actually a book from that series. I believe the title is Conjuring Spirits. But yeah, the Magic in History series is so far excellent. So, well, again, you can certainly make the argument that part of the reason that academia is willing to engage with this material is because some social justicely minded political hacks got it in their heads that taking magic seriously would be somehow subversive to the Western canon, which it isn't, because frankly, so much of the Western canon is based on magic to varying degrees. But for all that, there might be some unsavory intentions or political gobbledygook going on here, it is good that we are gaining more of an understanding of magic, and that understanding is being done in an academic context that then can be used by normal people and practitioners, or people who are interested in history. So yeah, no. While again, the social justice aspect of this concerns me, just like it would if it were, fundamentalist Christian type bullshit inculcating my magic. But the end results might be unintentionally positive regardless. So yeah, gives me all the magic literature published in modern English so that I can actually use it, please. Moving on. Jack-o'-lanterns. Actually, I think Dragon Troll said something.
Yeah, Dragon Troll said something at 9:50. Sorry, just into it now. You can have it both ways if the comedy isn't the news.
Well, okay, yes. If it wasn't literally, let's laugh at all these irrational people believing in irrational shit, lol. Yeah, they could make it work, but my point is that it's under most circumstances a logical contradiction, and they did jack shit nothing to alleviate the logical contradiction. They simultaneously want you to panic because people are taking magic seriously, and that means somehow irrationality is on the rise, and that look at these silly people believing in silly things, let's laugh at them. And those two halves don't work together. They create a syllogism which is bullshit. Anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
Yeah, this project focuses on a collection of magical texts attributed to an influential medieval scholar of the Arabic language. Anyway, that's not what I had in mind, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
It says here, this is how I think you will be able to destroy competition. It says there, Cauldron, when the moon.
Are you seriously surprised and or making fun of the fact that a book on magic would contain spells? Even an academic one. Even an academic who doesn't believe that any of this exists, if they're intellectually honest and they want to look at this from an anthropological perspective, they would give you the actual spells to examine what were these ingredients said to do, or in what context were these ingredients added, and so on. Like, this isn't hard to figure out. Even if you don't believe in the practicality or efficacy of magic, or think that it's silly or somewhat, from a historical and anthropological perspective, if you're being intellectually honest, books on the subject of magic should probably contain spells, if for no other reason than to provide examples to analyze. The fuck is wrong with you? Anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
Moon descends in this mansion, take a copper pot, and on the bottom engrave a peacock with its feathers spread and a snake in its mouth with 3 heads and a human head on its back. When you have done so and you want to remove a person's desire for food, then bind him. I can't read afterwards, but it seems like there's plenty of advice for how.
Okay, I can actually explain the mechanics here to some degree. It's possible that this is an Islamic or Arabic variant on something that you would find in the Greek magical papyri, because there are spells in the Greek magical papyri that are somewhat similar to this. But the whole moon in the mansion thing, in astrology, the heavens are basically broken down into regions, which are typically referred to as either houses or mansions. in the old school astrology manuals and so on, and quite a lot of the Islamic sorcery and most of the ceremonial magic in the Western world period, come to think of it, does at least have an astrological component. Hell, the most prolific Islamic text that made its way over to the Western world in, I want to say, the 1300s, is a book called the Picatrix, which specifically relates to astrological magic and how astrological understanding can be used to create charms and spells and shit. So, yeah, no, that does actually make some kind of sense from a magical perspective. Again, I think it probably has some basis in the Greek magic papyri or some similar system because of the peacock there. The peacock, of course, being famously a symbol for Hera, and of course a symbol for prosperity and likability and so on. So I'm assuming that the purpose of the peacock imagery there is to basically function as a symbol of prosperity to be negated, presumably by the serpent imagery. I would think. And like you said, we don't have the whole spell, so I can't look at it in full context, but from a magical perspective of someone who has read a fuck ton of grimoires in his time, no, that spell seems to be at least somewhat sensible. Moving forward, though, jack-o'-lanterns.
To do voodoo against other candidates for application. So this is a no-brainer. Definitely pursue this degree.
Yeah, you can make them lose their desire for food and slowly waste away. I think if you manage to meet them in the sort of interview hall before you go in, there should be enough time.
This is me being slightly pedantic, but not all sympathetic magic is voodoo. Sympathetic magic is a common thing in just about every magical system, especially folk magic systems, which this spells like this and the stuff in the Greek magic papyri kind of bridge the gap between folk magic and formalized ritual magic. So again, from what I know of not just grimoires, but the history of grimoires and sort of the like meta mechanics of grimoires, this does seem like a spell that you would see in this period in the Arabic countries. And it probably is based loosely on some precedent in folk magic that was then more formalized in a more ritual context. Probably. But obviously ethics and also, again, this kind of magic with like specific physical consequences is rather difficult to do, so there's that. So don't think you can just do the ritual component and call it good, because again, as with any spell, the spell is basically a machine which modifies your own life energy, which you then feed into it. But this is me more talking shop than really addressing what they're saying, because what they're saying is basically just dismissal bullshit. But yeah, the long and the short of it is, just because something is sympathetic magic doesn't necessarily make it voodoo, dude. It probably is a holdover from some unwritten folk magic system, which was then formalized into a more ritualistic context, because that was what was done quite a lot in this period. Which you would know if you actually took the subject matter seriously, but I digress. Jack-o'-lanterns.
In between the interview and when they make a final decision, that starving them is going to make them weaker, and then they're going to slowly fail. Maybe even if they get the job, they'll slowly waste away and then you can fly in on the coattails, just like that last person was rubbish. They just started, becoming more and more skeletal and withering away, and then
Well, I mean, okay. I mean, to be fair, not that Josh and Stelios particularly care, but while I'm talking shop, a spell like this meant to like block health and block prosperity wouldn't just have the one consequence. It would effectively starve them out in more than just the physical sense. It would prevent prosperity from reaching them to begin with. At least again, comparing this to what I know of Solomonic magic, what I know of various other kinds of folk magic, be it hoodoo, be it what little I know of voodoo, be it Kambanda, be it Santerio, be it conjure, etc. This kind of, I guess you could call it a starvation spell, would starve someone in more than just the literal sense. It would also prevent like positive influences from reaching them full stop. It would effectively put them in a bubble of, I mean, it's described even in the text as a binding. So the purpose of something like a binding is to essentially section someone off, to prevent them from receiving energies, be they, the kind of prosperity that would lead you to a good harvest and therefore would starve you, or be it luck, or be it the ability to use counter magic sometimes. There are binding spells that are specifically designed to counter someone else's magic preemptively. So this kind of anti-prosperity magic probably would starve someone out in more than just the most literal and direct sense. Anyway, that's just me talking shop. Jack-o'-lanterns.
got worse and worse in their job.
And there's also an extra element of self-improvement in pursuing studies, because there are studies that give you skills for a particular job, but there's also the element of self-betterment. And I have a picture of the future Josh that you.
Oh God, here comes the joke. But I don't really have anything to add here, so jack-o'-lanterns.
You can aspire to.
All right, let's see it.
This one.
Oh, my nose is going to grow quite a lot, and my teeth are going to get worse.
This is Josh pursuing Islamic witchcraft.
I become uglier but more powerful.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a trade I'm willing.
Bitch, you would suffer a brain aneurysm after like 3 weeks of actual study. I am convinced of it. You fiddle fuck around and then something would get mad at you and you would suffer a brain aneurysm inexplicably. And they would acknowledge the fact that you got a brain aneurysm, but they would never acknowledge the fuck around and find out portion that people like me would notice. So yeah, obviously the joke is a joke, so I'm not really judging the joke, but this kind of attitude would get you dead really quickly in Magic. And or you would probably just, assuming you didn't put in the necessary effort, you probably would just have an unending like several year period of bad luck that would ultimately lead you to being destitute. Either way, my point is that this attitude would not benefit you at all in Magic.
So
you would fuck around and find out so fast that it would not even be funny.
I was gonna say something, but I don't really think it's relevant, to be honest.
I mean, go ahead if you have something to say. Then by all means say it. I feel like I'm monopolizing a little bit too much.
Well, this isn't really my forte. I'm not really like, you're the Magic guy. You'd have more to say about this than I do.
I mean, yes, but I don't want to discourage you from talking if you have something to say.
Like, the thing I was going to say was, honestly, he doesn't look that much different in the photo.
No,
Like,
no, he doesn't. It's not. It's not. If he didn't point out specifically what was different, I wouldn't have noticed it. Then again, this is less. I mean, it's not ugliness. Unlike the medieval understanding of ugliness, has no bearing whatsoever on your medieval or your character, except maybe in the physiognomy sense. So like so yeah, completely irrelevant ad hominem.
but also,
Still funny though, because it points out how ugly he is.
I mean, I didn't want to be disrespectful, and I also just don't see the point in this. Like, I get it's a joke, but it adds nothing at all.
It's essentially we are so much better than people who believe in magic. That's what this is. Which again, you
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, I think I mentioned this like last week, but why wouldn't you believe in magic? It's like completely illogical not to believe in it, like aliens and stuff, like that whole that went on. Like, it's
honestly, it effectively boils down to a normalcy bias. Society, you know,
okay.
People have basically been dismissive to magic for so long that it almost just inherently to most people just goes like to most people believing in magic is like believing in the tooth fairy or some shit. Like to most people, magic is something reserved for children or morons. Never mind that quite a lot of people are religious regardless, and never mind that quite a lot of people, believe almost unquestioningly in the sciences, and to the point that science moves from a field of study to a moral occupation, hence scientism. But like, and never mind that neither religion nor science would really have much of a leg to stand on without magic to build on. But oh well.
Well, again, it's just like, again, from my perspective of it, the same thing with the alien thing I mentioned last week. From a logical perspective, like logically, it makes no sense why that doesn't exist in the world. Because, like I mentioned earlier, from magic, a lot of things have been built from that, like medical sciences, science.
Well, it's simply the fact that people don't, and it must be said that quite a lot of practitioners have this problem too. Not a lot of people have actually taken the time to figure out how magic works. And so, since they haven't taken the time to figure out how magic works, they assume that it's just a nebulous concept that can mean literally anything. To a lot of people, magic is synonymous with irrational and like abstract spiritual nonsense. To a lot of people, magic is synonymous with irrational superstition, and they don't actually think much about it, because and this is how you can tell, because if you ask them to define magic, a lot of them can't do it. A lot of them don't even know what it is they're supposed to be not believing in. It's kind of like how a lot of people's knee-jerk reaction to ghosts is there's no such thing as ghosts, and they never like a lot of people have a knee-jerk reaction of there is no such thing. Never mind that they can't even define the thing that's supposed to not be there. Like, they don't have a definition for magic. They just intuitively know there's no such thing. They don't have a definition for ghosts or spirits. They just know there could not possibly be any such thing. It's literally I was told this and never really gave it a second thought. again, it's the normal people don't believe in this, therefore there must be no basis to it. That's basically the rationale.
All right. One other thing I have anything else to say is the shall we?
Yep, jack-o'-lanterns.
Thing to make.
I-
Look
I-
at that cauldron.
In the world we're living, beauty is overrated. Power is what makes the world.
If I
go
can
round.
shoot lightning out my fingers, I would do it without hesitation. That
Yeah.
would be a worthwhile trade. I'd take the Palpatine trade. I'll have the wrinkly face if I get to shoot lightning.
And just out of curiosity, what
Dude, you'd be more likely to be struck by lightning with this attitude. Because I could see you fiddle fuck around like this in a ritual circle just to prove you can. And then like the next week you get struck by lightning or some shit. Now, it must be said that like you really can't do that kind of blast magic in real life. I mean there are ways to generate fire with magic. There are ways to generate like electrical sparks with magic, but in terms of straight up shooting the lightning out of your hands, no. Never going to happen, and moreover, it was never even thought to be magically possible in the Middle Ages when this shit was common. You could hypothetically use weather magic to direct lightning, which is more plausible, although still rather difficult. But in terms of like shooting fireballs or lightning out of your fingertips, again, there are ways to start fire with magic. I know of one spell in a book called Merlin's Magic, Merlin with a Y, the Wizard's Secret Notebooks, that describes basically how to set a cotton ball on fire using magic. But as far as like direct, from thought to physical phenomena, that kind of stuff is rare. And most of the big magic you would want to do is going to be more large scale than that anyway. So like again, you can conjure weather, you can, if you're really, really good at it, you might be able to direct lightning at somebody from a cloud, but in terms of the straight up shooting lightning out of your hands, no.
And I also feel
Not
like that. Sorry, just a little anecdote to that. I feel like that would have to take years, like decades of study, practice, and
Well, it's not even a. I mean, there is a knowledge component that would make it difficult, but it's not even strictly a knowledge based issue. It's there isn't enough raw magical energy in the world that we find ourselves in to do that. If you were in like the D&D universe or the Marvel universe or the DC universe, that works because magic, and to their credit, Marvel and DC describe magic well, and they depict magic well. The difference between the Marvel universe or the DC universe and our universe is that there appears to just straight up be more ambient magical energy to work with in the first place. And that's what makes the more flashy magic possible. Most of the big scale magic that you would want to do, or that like movies and stuff depict, is usually done through an intermediary spirit of some kind. So like you get yourself a familiar spirit and you have them do shit, or something along those lines. But in terms of just straight up,
basically, it's a lot of in-depth stuff that these guys would not put the effort into learning nor
No, and here's the other thing. Barring a universe where there's more magical energy to pull from, which would make it more plausible. Barring a universe where there's more magical energy to pull from in the fucking first place, you wouldn't even it wouldn't even be efficient or cost effective to shoot fire directly out of your hands or your fingers or whatever, as opposed to making a fire that already exists shoot up out of control, which is something you can do. Or, why would you choose to shoot lightning out of your fingertips when you can just as easily conjure a storm cloud that can then strike, that can then shoot lightning at whatever enemy you're targeting with the spell? That's the thing. Most of the really impressive stuff you can do with magic is done on a larger scale. It's done on a more like world scale or a universal scale rather than instant phenomena. Yeah, and even the instant phenomena you can do is more along the lines of knowing effectively where the levers are, what to manipulate in the world around you to make things happen. So, like, for example, I've always been really good at rain and snow. I've always been really good at conjuring those things. And the way I do it typically when I'm doing it, I don't do it nearly as much anymore because I found it hard not to do it after doing it so many times, and so now I actually have to physically tell myself, don't influence the storm when it rains and shit. But the way I used to do it is you basically can create an energetic connection between yourself and the cloud, and then instead of moving mass quantities of rain, all you need to do is amplify the already existing natural process. Like, everyone knows how the weather cycle works. When rain clouds get too heavy, the water in them clumps up, and that causes rain. So all you really need to do from a magical perspective to make it rain is you pick a cloud, you rearrange the particles of water in that to the point that they get heavy in one particular area, and then boom, it rains. And a similar thing can be done to stop rain. You just change the way the water is arranged, and then boom, the rain stops, and so on.
We got 5 minutes of this lesson. I want to get through this different thing. So.
Yep. Jack-o'-lanterns.
What magic have to do with decolonization and anti-racism? It's just inclusive magic.
Well, they're trying to say that everyone claims that, Europe, we were never wrong about anything ever, and all of the rest of the world, they're stupid. And that's what everyone thinks, isn't it? That no one ever, talks about witch trials.
No, my friend, you even addressing the social justice nonsense that is related to this shit, which you almost had a point here. Or rather, I guess Stelios is the one who had a point of magic and magical studies doesn't have anything whatsoever to do with decolonization and racism, herder. But the social justice rationale for this is, and you almost had it right, is the hyper rational approach that Europe takes to dealing with the world is too narrow, or the result of power politics rather than rationality, and therefore we should examine other worldviews for their rationales and their outcomes, because for too long we have quote unquote marginalized other cultures' way of viewing the world, which would be child's play for you to refute, I would think. But instead of actually addressing the argument, you made up some bullshit in your own head. In the SJW's mind, it's not that it's not that Europe is uniquely rational. It's Europe's dogmatic focus on what they consider rationality to be prevented them from seeing the merits in other worldviews. That's what the SJW argument is. Now, mind you, again, I will die on this hill as many times as I have to, but magic is not irrational. It is not irrational, and for the most part never has been. The conflation between magic and irrationality, or the conflation between magic and superstition even, is a falsehood. But we can't even address the straw manning of magic, i.e. claiming it is a irrational way of thinking when it's not, because you're too busy arguing with the SJWs, and not even successfully doing that because you're not actually capable of taking their arguments seriously. And in order to argue against anyone, you do actually have to steel man their position. You do actually have to take their worldview on face value to then go in and undermine it using logic. But even then, you completely bungled that. Anyway, Jack-o'-lanterns. Oh wait, Brainstormer just messaged me and said he'd be right back. So we will look at the chat while he is away doing things. There have been no new chats according to my chat log. The last thing Dragon Turtle said was fair enough in relation to the humor thing.
I'm back. I just had to throw away a can and get a new drink.
Okay.
All right, let me mute again, and we'll.
And sort of weird superstitions or mythology about weird creatures and things like that. That never goes on. We never talk about that in Europe.
It's fun that you have not only a degree in witchcraft, but also a woke degree in witchcraft when they combine it with. Because imagine how they would say, for instance, access to magic.
Okay. Normally y'all are extremely pompous and chauvinistic about how great the Western, and in particular the Anglosphere perspective on everything is, and yet you just threw your entire culture's pre-Christian mythology and religion under the bus. Not to mention, if you actually did want to have this out on something regarding on something resembling a intellectually honest term, you could compare the impacts and rationales of European magic to other cultures' forms of magic, which you would have an actual argument to say that European magic is slightly more ritualized and intellectualized and sophisticated. So you could actually go, if you were being intellectually honest, our magic is better than your magic. Not least of which because, Western magic did eventually lead to the natural sciences. So you could even tie in the, magic was a necessary step on the road to the sciences thing, if you wanted to. But you're too busy poo-pooing the very concept of magic being taken seriously at all to do what you normally do, which is say our mythologies and our religions are the best, y'all. And again, if you stopped poo-pooing magic for 5 seconds and actually did some research onto your own culture's forms of magic, you could even go so far as to say English or European magic is better than all the other magics somehow. I would still kind of tentatively argue against you a little bit there, but it would at least be a more productive and defensible conversation than even our otherwise perfect culture did stupid things. Because you actually want to believe in magic less than you do want to be a proud Englishman, which is not the hill I would die on if I were you. I would just straight up go, yeah, we have magic, and that's part of what makes us awesome. And in fact, our magic is better than your magic. Again, if I were you, I'm not you, and I don't see any reason to need to go. Some forms of magic are better than others, except for in the like sophistication and like technical and intellectual sense, or in the effectiveness sense, um, which I will make those distinctions because magic is basically applied spirituality when you get right down to it, and therefore its practicality, its efficiency, and its like intellectual complexity are important. But yeah, if I were you, I would go so far as to research magic of the like English and European variety, and try to make the case that that like formalized ritual magic, for example, is better than folk magic, especially that which derived from like the Southern Americas or like African countries. But you couldn't even get that far because you're too much of a prick to even acknowledge how important magic was to the British fricking Isles, which I'm convinced that I'm convinced that the spiritual entities that helped to form the uniquely sophisticated British culture that you're so fond of, would take issue with that. But I'm not going to try and speak for them because I don't want to spontaneously die of hypothermia. Moving up.
Alright, I'm back, by the way. Internet crapped out for like a minute there, so I think I'm good now. Is everything being displayed properly?
Okay. It's no problem, Dragon Turtle. I was just looking to fill the void while Brainstormer was getting his second drink.
Can you hear me?
But yeah. It's doing buffering things still on my end.
Can you hear me now? Or?
I will I'll dip out and come back in and see if that helps. Okay. All appears to be right with the world. I can see shit now. But anyway, jack-o'-lanterns. As and when we can move along with the thing. Okay,
Hear me?
you're back. Okay, I wasn't aware you were still gone, but you're back now.
I got in here. Yeah, my internet crapped out, and I popped back on, and you didn't hear me. I was talking.
Yeah. I guess the connection was still wonky there for a minute, but yeah. Back to the grind.
Yeah. Oh, let me mute myself real quick.
Yip 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 yip.
For instance, access to magic has been regularly denied to some people.
Well, do
if
you
that
remember?
is the case, then it is Westerners who have been denied access to magic.
Do you remember a bunch of American witches were casting hexes or curses on Donald Trump?
Yes.
Okay, leaving aside the fluffy bunnies doing stupid political shit for a second. Bitch, Stelios, you are Greek, mate. You are Greek. And Josh, you are English. At no point were your cultures denied magic, except for maybe in the last couple of centuries, because the scientists decided to declare war against anything that wasn't them, and the religious think that all magic is evil for some reason. But magic is actually, funnily enough, between those two things, between the like Greek, the impact of magic on Greek culture and the impact of magic on the culture in the British freaking Isles, you two are spawned of a set of cultures that have arguably one of the most magical histories or that we're aware of in the West. So, like, to say that Western culture has been denied magic for some reason is literally just as fallacious as what the SJWs do. Because you're right, the SJWs do make the argument that 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 magic comes from places like Africa or South America, as though there was no Western equivalent. And what you just said is just as stupid, because bitch, magic has been a formative part of human civilization basically from the word go until maybe 300 years ago, if we're stretching. And even then, the 19th century had its occult revival thanks to people like Samuel Leather Gregor Mathers and Crowley and the Golden Dawn and shite. So the time when like the Western canon was devoid of magic was very rare, and when it was in some sense devoid of magic, it was basically devoid of magic by gunpoint almost. Because between the religious demonization of magic and the scientific mockery of magic, that's basically the only force that has kept magic down for the last couple decades or centuries. And even then, the 60s saw, flower power and psychedelia and that subset of occult revival and the New Age movement, and then you get into people like Gerald Gardner and so on, and on we go basically to the modern period where magic is finally, on the rise again. So there's that. Also, now I will address the politically motivated stupid people. One, as I mentioned previously, very few people in the magical community take the New Age fluffy bunnies seriously. We even have a term for it, which is fluffy bunnies. And again, as I have said many, many times, I hate the politicization of magic. I hate the ideological weaponization of magic. Magic should stand on its own 2 feet, just like every other kind of human endeavor. Now, on to my perspective as to what the fuck went wrong with the Trump hexing, apart from the fact that it was simply a dumb thing to try and do to begin with, because magic shouldn't be political, period. The reason it didn't work, or backfired on them ridiculously, is a couplefold. One, there are a lot of spiritual entities that hate those people, that hate the SJWs / the New Age Fluffy Bunny types, particularly after the TikTok Hex the Moon incident, because while their hex didn't have wide-ranging consequences, it did kill a bunch of little folk, and it made the Fairy Queens rather upset. And so they went rather scorched earth on this whole thing, to the point that a friend of mine told me that one time Mav appeared to him, and according to his perspective of her, in this particular instance, she appeared wearing a MAGA hat. So there's that. But two, it's because of all the magics in all the world, New Age Fluffy Bunny type shit is the most magically neutered in all the world, because they don't actually put any effort or energy behind their spells, and even the spells they do put effort and energy into, it's basically energy inefficient magic. Also, because of the moral doctrines of the New Agers, and basically no other reason, their magic operates based on those moral suppositions, which includes the rule of three. And seeing as they were trying, these people who allegedly operate on the code of do what thou wilt, but in it harm none, because these people whose magic is specifically supposed to be inward facing by its design, and also love and light oriented and not harmful, because these people tried to do harmful magic, and they themselves basically projected a prison onto themselves, or a subroutine onto themselves, which was the rule of three, their magic basically got tied up together, and rather than constructively interfering with each other's magic and amplifying each other's magic, it basically became a tangled web which stopped their own magic from working. And because they believe in the rule of three, and therefore their spell work was woven along the lines of the rule of three, they basically played themselves, because now whatever negative consequences they would have inflicted on Trump is now going to come back to them threefold. Also, it must be said, they didn't actually understand Trump all that well. And here's the thing about spell work. When you're doing magic on other people, you have to make some effort to understand that person, because what Donald Trump defined as harmful is not necessarily what the New Age Fluffy Bunny witches would call harmful. And so their spell is operating on their definition of harm. And if, for example, Trump's definition of harm is not equivalent to their definition of harm, like, for example, because these are SJWs and Fluffy Bunnies we're dealing with, their definition of harm would probably be something like to be publicly shamed, or to be publicly seen as illegitimate.
I don't mean to cut you off, but
yeah, let me finish the point before we move on. But anyway, like I was saying, the SJW's definition of harm, especially in the Wiccan Fluffy Bunny don't harm anyone in a real way sense, the SJW's definition of harm is probably something like be seen as publicly illegitimate. But Trump doesn't see that as harmful. So no matter how publicly illegitimate he looks, especially among the establishment, which the SJWs do care about, but Trump does not, it doesn't actually equate to actually harming him, because he doesn't care about legitimacy among the establishment. He cares about legitimacy among the populace, and that's why, even insofar as their spells were probably effective, it didn't actually do something that Trump would define as harmful, because he doesn't think like they do. And he was able to use his public disgrace among the establishment to his advantage rather than his disadvantage. Anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
All right, give me a second.
I wonder if that worked. I'm sure all of the litigation going on towards him at the minute, that's a product of the witchcraft, isn't it? It's not, politics, business as usual.
But don't you know politics is downstream from magic?
Magic is controlling everything.
Yeah, and imagine that they had to fill some statements that like you have.
I mean, unironically, the bits of it that were effective probably did amplify it. But again, the funny thing is, because they don't understand how Trump thinks or how his framework works. Their worst fear, their worst definition of harm, especially that they can come up with in the Wiccan context, is you will be seen as illegitimate by the establishment. But if, for example, you thrive off of being an outsider and thumbing your nose at the establishment, that's not harm, especially when you've got spiritual entities like, for example, Queen Mab, working against you and thinking in the long term. So, in some way, it baffled me at first when Trump didn't win in 2020 because I knew there were spirits going, or there were spirits who I could reasonably verify were in his corner. And then I remembered, wait, these are immortals who think in the long term. And it actually benefited Trump to be defamed in 2020 because now he gets to use that as a legitimate source of victimhood. And now the establishment hatred, which may or may not have been amplified by the spells casted by people who didn't know what they were doing, are coming home to roost. And the very same hatred and establishment defaming that led to him losing in 2020 is now going to make his ascendancy in 2024 an almost certainty. And I could actually see, especially someone like Mab or Odin, playing basically a military game whereby we will set things up so that he looks weak now, so that we can then maximize that leverage in 2024. So, unironically, it might have had some effect, but because of the way their spell work works, or rather, because of the way it kind of was playing itself, it might have come back to bit them in the ass anyway. And it was probably going to regardless because they operate within the rule of three. Because they're morons. Anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
When you throw curses, the people you target with your curses need to be a diverse group of people.
Yeah, you've got to be in your maiming of humanity. You need to be diverse in your targets. You need to target everyone equally.
Exactly. So that
or you need to know what the fuck you're doing. And that more than anything is one of the reasons why this inevitably is going to come back to bite them in the ass. One, because of their own rule of three standard. Two, because entities who are smarter even than I are playing against them. And three, because in order to harm someone, you actually need to know what that person considers to be harmful. And if you say consider being hated by the establishment to be the highest degree of harm you're willing to be comfortable with, and your target isn't shaken or is even in some sense buoyed by the establishment shaming and hating him, your spell is going to backfire horribly. Moving on. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Well, I did want to say, where's the part where have we already passed the part where It made you immediately stop and say we should cover this.
I don't think we're there yet. I think it is more towards the end.
Wow. I mean, yeah, we're still dealing with a lot, Steven. I'm just surprised is all.
Yeah. I thought it was closer to the middle too, but I'm pretty. I know it's here. We just haven't. I don't think gotten to it yet. Anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
That's the issue. And also there's the anti-racism bit, that you need to use this magic in order to ensure equal representation for all groups in the list of people who will be targeted by
You've got to think of the suffering and pain of George Floyd, as he was rather Freudian.
Okay. I'm not going to hate on them here because they're making fun of fluffy bunnies. The only problem is they conflate fluffy bunnies with everyone who believes or practices magic. So, fuck you. But moving on. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Calling for Mama, his girlfriend, when he was dying, and you use that suffering to generate power.
So, I mean, let's just say this. I think that it's fine to study stuff when they're talking about beliefs about witchcraft and beliefs about magic. It's interesting, but it's really.
And here is where we get into the moment where I'm like, yeah, no, this needs to be nuked. Jack-o'-lanterns.
Fun when they use factive language and they don't talk about the impact that beliefs about magic had and beliefs about witchcraft had on society, which they did, but they were talking about the actual impact, which implies that they actually believe in magic and witchcraft.
You would be amazed at the resurgence of this. Like it
My dude, it's because for anyone who's intellectually honest, that is a redundant phrasing that only exists so that you, in your ivory tower way, can dismiss it. In the same way you wouldn't say beliefs about Christianity or beliefs about science or beliefs about cooking or something. No, you refer specifically to the institution. Whether you think that institution is reasonable or valid or efficacious is a completely separate issue. But most people don't need the distinction. They know when you say witchcraft or magic, you mean the various kinds of spirituality and or practice that are grouped under the heading of magic, in the same way as you don't say beliefs about Christianity, because when you say Christianity, even people who aren't Christian or who are atheist or anti-theist or whatever, no, you don't mean just the angels and God and so on. You mean the systems of belief about Christianity and or the culture that fosters it. Well, just like that, you don't have to believe that magic is practical or efficacious. It is, but never mind. To believe that magic or witchcraft as a belief system or a subheader has had impacts. And the only reason you would throw the extra belief in there, the only reason you would add that extra phrasing is because you want magic to be seen as less legitimate than other forms of belief, up to and including science and Christianity, which is dumb and intellectually dishonest to boot. Moving on. Jack-o'-lanterns. That wasn't even the bit. It's getting to the bit, but that wasn't even the bit. Oh my god.
It took me entirely by surprise that people genuinely believe in this stuff. I was just like, right, interest in it for a sort of academic sake of, yeah, if someone brought me a book of magical spells, I'd probably read it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't believe it actually worked, but just how people approached it.
My dude, okay, I'm going to offer a thought experiment for you. If you were raised in the Star Trek future, where basically all spiritual beliefs have gone the way of the dodo, and someone explains to you Christianity, or you found someone who for some reason still believes in Christianity in the 24th century or whatever, would you react in the same way? Would you react in the same way? And I'm asking you this on an intuitive level. Would you have the same intuitive reaction in the 24th century to someone who believed in bargain basement, basic bitch Christianity? I'm almost entirely certain would say no, because you see the utility, at the very least, of Christianity, even if you're an atheist. Well, why is it that you are so flabbergasted by the belief in magic? Mind you, a set of beliefs, or a meta grouping of beliefs that have impacted every human culture on the fucking planet, and every human species of endeavor that one could care to mention. It's impacted cooking, it's impacted medicine, it's impacted the sciences, it's impacted religion, it's impacted philosophy, it's impacted the arts. Just pick a lane, pick any subject, and I could explain to you with very little intellectual dishonesty or mental gymnastics how magic had some impact on it, up to and including Christianity. But jack-o'-lanterns.
Well, before that, hello, Subcontainee. Hello. You see what Batman did to Jason? Batman made him into a cooked vegetable by using brain control. Remember here, Jason has been revived by a logic kit, so his mind is not that of a normal person, so Batman basically turned him into a vegetable.
I have never. Did they do a Batman versus Jason comic recently?
I'm not been a recent thing lately. Full honesty, Ahsoka, I have not paid attention to Marvel or DC within the storylines lately because, well, nothing's interesting me.
Yeah, I just get omnibuses and so forth with the old shit. Because
I check out indie stuff most of the time.
Like my shelf contains several DC omnibuses, several Marvel omnibuses and trades and what have you, and then a crap ton actually of
Ahsoka said it was the comic you and me read before with Catwoman having made the stuff. That same arc.
Huh. Okay. Interesting. And by interesting, I mean God DC continues to circle the drain. But
I'm sorry. Now that's a rant for a different time. It's not relevant.
Yeah, there are actually Lotus Eaters episodes where they talk about comics, and it is, as usual, you would expect, cringy, and
look,
they don't understand Superman, which is what made me think of Brainstormer immediately when I saw it. But we will address that on a more normal day. But
yeah.
we should jack-o'-lanterns this.
Would be interesting to me.
Yeah.
And maybe there was some truth behind the myth, if you will, where they're combining certain ingredients and there is some sort of chemical reaction in a sort of alchemical chemistry sense.
And just final point, I think that a lot of the time people are talking about a spiritual gap in the.
And this is exactly the bit that drove me mad. But let them actually say it before I bitch slap them into next week. Jack-o'-lanterns.
In the modern world, you can say that there is, but I hardly think that magic and witchcraft is going to give anything other than the illusion of that gap being filled?
Well, I'm not one to appeal to the good sense of all the religions of the world often, but most religions view magic as bad. At least,
Okay, there's actually two parts to that. There's what Stelio said and then what Josh said. One, let me explain to you why magic is on the rise. And I'm going to try to explain it without deferring to the actual physical consequences of magic. But there are, as I see it, two sort of non-conformist views on religion that are probably the most prevalent views on religion in this day and age. There are people who I think Stelios and Josh are in this camp. The Carl Jung or Jordan Peterson camp of, even though metaphysical things don't exist, we should act as though they do because they act as some kind of moral center for the world. The idea of you can't have morality without metaphysical beliefs. These people confuse and frustrate me for an endless series of reasons. But foremost among them is metaphysics and morality don't need to be related at all. And I can explain this in a short way of explaining a very simple question. And I preemptively apologize to all the Christians listening and yada yada yada. But here's the question: are things moral because God said so? I.e., does God get to declare on a whim what is moral? Or did he arrive at the knowledge of what is moral using reasoning? I.e., did he observe something about the world, or did he create something in the world in such a way that morality is derived from logic? If he is the one who decides what is moral, then it is completely arbitrary and by fiat, and we have no reason to listen to it. If, however, God declared certain things moral because they were, and he was just observing them and purveyed that information to the faithful somehow, then it is possible to derive moral truths through reasoning and not defer to the authority of God. Moreover, there are plenty of gods and spiritual entities who you really, really, really shouldn't be taking moral truths from, because morality and metaphysics are two separate categories. I.e., I don't believe in the things I believe because I think they're utilitarianly or morally useful. I believe in them because I think they're true. Now, mind you, what is the other camp? This is the religion is useful only as a source of morality, and nothing's metaphysical actually exists camp. The Joseph or rather the Jordan Peterson or Carl Jung camp. The other camp, and the camp that I kind of mostly fall into, is the part of spirituality and religion that doesn't view it as a source or even related to morality. I.e., people don't need religion or spirituality as a moral compass or as a source of morality, a narrative, which is what the cultural Christians and the Jordan Petersons seem to believe. People have a need for spirituality because they think it should rationally be there, and they want a practical approach to it. I.e., they don't look at religion or spirituality as a source of morality and story and abstraction. They look at spirituality as a source of, what can I do with this? How can I apply this to my life? And given that the moral mandate of Christianity is fading, because most of the rules of morality that Christianity does have can be found in other places, be they evolutionary psychology, be they other cultures, because frankly the Hammurabic Code, the Greco-Roman moral system, etc., they all share things in common with the Judeo-Christian one, and so obviously you don't need the Judeo-Christian one to find them, even if you wanted to get it from a spiritual context. But the other half of the people are the people. Now, mind you, the third category is, of course, atheists who, don't believe in any of this shit and or don't find morality to be particularly important in it regardless. But there is the second camp, the part that I'm a part of, which is I don't need metaphysics or spirituality to tell me about morality. I have logic for that, and I have evolutionary psychology for that. I, however, view that spirituality is an actual thing that exists, and I want to engage with it in a practical sense. Now, that is to Stelios' point. The point I'm making, of course, is that the reason why people are finding use in magic and why it is filling the spiritual gap is because the approach of magic to spirituality is morality and narrative are irrelevant. What you really need is practical use. What you really need is stuff you can actually do, consequences to the thing. And this further goes to Josh's point, the point about, well, every religion says that magic is bad, MK. And the reason for that, Josh, actually has very little whatsoever to do with morality. The reason why the church, in particular, and the Abrahamic religions in particular, don't like magic is because whatever you may think about the truths of Christianity or lack thereof, for the longest time, religion was a power structure, and the priest was the authoritative head of said power structure. But if you have a more practical understanding of spirituality, for example, if you can conjure an angel or a demon or God himself or what have you, and simply ask directly for guidance or for help or for what have you, there is no need for a priest. And that, more than anything, is the reason why the Abrahamic religions fucking hated magic. Not because it was somehow immoral. In fact, the verse in Deuteronomy that is so often phrased as "thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," the more accurate translation from the ancient Hebrew and Greek there used is "thou shalt not suffer a poisoner to live." And the reason why that flub was made is because, as stated, King James was a paranoid motherfucker who hated witches and demons with a passion and who would use any excuse to call them bad. But more to the point, the reason why the organized religions of the world fucking hate magic is because magic is focused on practical consequences of spirituality, applied practical knowledge of spirituality. And when you have practical applied knowledge of spirituality, you don't need morality and narrative and abstraction, i.e., when you're a magic practitioner who can summon these spiritual entities for advice and consultation and so forth, you don't need a priest to act as a middleman. And they fucking hate that. That people can have practical, certain, or at least rational knowledge of the spiritual and don't need the guidance of a priest to do it, and moreover, don't need to focus so heavily on narrative and morality as a result. That's why organized religions say that magic is bad. It's because priests in the old days really liked being the spiritual middleman and liked having the moral and abstract authority that religion gave them. And when you're a magical practitioner, you don't fucking need a priest. You can do shit yourself. Or you can ask the entities who are involved in these spiritual systems to show up for themselves and speak for themselves. And that terrifies the living shit out of religious people, especially priests.
Right.
Yeah, jack-o'-lanterns.
No, hold on. Grand Turtle asked a question. Are you sure that doesn't really make sense? By that logic, teachers should be lobbying for the NXT shutting down all professionals against self-help books, etc., especially since the longest time it was held that priests was the key component in the mass as a ritual. That was a rather recent change to put more focus on the congregation.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to read through that myself because Brainstormer's mic was echoing horribly for some reason. Are you sure that doesn't really make sense? By that logic, teachers should be lobbying for the internet to be shut down. All professionals against self-help. Dragon Turtle. I don't know. I don't know if you've noticed, but there is quite a lot of hatred of the internet among teachers in this day and age, and there are a lot of hatred of like self-help books and independent scholarship among people in authority in given professions. Look at the way modern day academia looks at Jordan Peterson. Look at the way that I forget his name, but the guy with the unconventional archaeology theory is regarded by the archaeological establishment and so on. And of course, there are dozens upon dozens of articles saying something to the effect of, hey teachers, look out, your students might be radicalized by the alt-right from shit they learn online or something. Yeah, because the progressives are the new holders of moral and abstract authority, and they don't want you to question it. Much much like as a specific example, there is a grimoire called the Grimoire of Abra Merlin. It was written by a guy by the name of Abraham of Worms, which is spelled kind of like worms, but that's not how you're supposed to say it. Anyway, said grimoire is known particularly for having a spell in it that will put you in touch with your holy guardian angel. And churches hate books like that because, again, if you can summon up an entity and commune with it yourself, you don't really need a priest. This is the main reason why organized religions hate magic. It's because when a populace is spiritually literate, i.e., when they actually can learn practical magic for themselves, they often find that they don't need the priest anymore. And even outside of a magical context, you know what the most controversial book was when the printing press was first introduced? It was an English translation of the Bible. The reason being, prior to that, all or most of the translations of the Bible were done in ecclesiastical Latin by monks. And therefore, the average person who spoke English and not ecclesiastical Latin needed the priest to translate what the Bible actually said. However, when the Bible was placed in the popular language, which was English, they feared what their flocks would do if they were left to do the interpretation by themselves. And the funniest thing is, they of course weren't wrong, because shortly after the Bible was first published in English via the printing press, the Protestant Reformation happened. Because Luther and Calvin had their respective epiphanies of, wait, this isn't how this is supposed to work. And then away we go with the Protestant Reformation.
So I don't mean to cut you guys like discussion off, but I do. We are already 3 hours into this, and I really want to get off this video.
Yes, Dragon Turtle. The point that I think is sailing clean over your head here is when any given expertise becomes more about appeals to authority than it does practicality, or more about moral abstraction than it does about practicality, that institution becomes anathema to independent investigation. It doesn't undermine my argument at all. It's a reoccurring feature of institutions and positions of authority and establishments of authority that hate independent inquiry of any fucking kind.
Guys, thank you, Dragon Turtle.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Anyway, jack-o'-lanterns.
all right, so you
Most popular ones in the Western world,
Well,
certainly the Islamic world, I think it's punishable by death, isn't it? I don't know.
Um,
That's just me guessing, but it sounds about right. Therefore, it must be true. That's how it works, isn't it?
thank you. So, will you pursue this degree?
So you're saying that the Islamic world is right to behead people for sorcery? Is that where we are? Have you joked yourself down to literally condoning mass murder based on people believing in things you don't like or don't consider valid? Is that where we are? Did you literally just say one an ad populum fallacy of everyone says this, therefore it must be true, which again, you ignore the reasons why those institutions actually had a problem with magic, and two, you may have just joked yourself all the way down to condoning mass murder of people who practice Sahir. So I unironically am sick of you at that point, because at no point is, well, everyone who talks about this thinks thinks it should be punishable by death, therefore they couldn't possibly be wrong. That is not an intellectually honest or defensible position, and you are a humanitarian nightmare if you think that. Fuck off, sir. Yeah, jack-o'-lantern.
Well, you had me with the magic part, the potential to shoot lightning, and all of that sounds great. If I can, levitate, maybe control people's minds.
I'm sure there will be something for that. I'm sure there will be, but you need to have some faith.
That's the problem. But
Magic doesn't require faith because magic is practical. Fuck you. Magic is in fact so practical that there are entire atheistic strains of it, i.e., things like chaos magic, things like parapsychology, things like, and it's somewhat dubious, but orgone and Wilhelm Reich's shit. You don't even need gods and spirits necessarily to do some versions of magic. Now, mind you, there's plenty of spirit work in magic, but once you get over this magic is irrational by default, spirituality is irrational and abstract by default nonsense, you suddenly find yourself thinking that the existence of spirits makes a hell of a lot more sense and isn't inherently irrational. So, yeah, no, you don't even necessarily need faith for magic to work, because magic is the applied form of spirituality in the sense that you don't even necessarily need to believe in shit for it to work. And there are atheist versions of it because it is that adaptable and that universal to human nature. Womp, 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 womp. But jack-o'-lanterns, again.
If it wasn't so woke, I would actually be genuinely in favor of this. Like, I think that if it's like a master's, you've already done a degree in something a bit more general and applicable. and then you choose a specialization. And these sorts of master's courses, may have an intake of like 20 people a year. So it's not going to be like massive.
Okay, you know what? I will take back some of my vile spewing from a second ago, because at the very least he's willing to engage with the material. So good for you. You're not quite to the point where I would like you to be, where you can actually stop being such a prick and actually engage with the material. But hey, who knows? Maybe you will discover like the Magic and History series from whichever university does that series. I actually think it might be Oxford. I know Oxford has published books on Magic before. So there's that. But you might actually engage with those books and then come away with it with, at the very least, a little bit more respect and a little bit less flippancy of Magic. So I will take back some of the vitriol I just said, but you did almost literally say every major religion disputes this, therefore it's okay that Islamists behead people. So fuck off, sir. Still, moving on. Jack-o'-lanterns.
It's not like the market is being oversaturated.
But Justin,
sorry, I was just going to say that there actually shouldn't be cultural blind spots in academia. I support everyone investigating everything, but it's just about how you allocate resources. I think the fact that they're one of the few universities to do it, and it's probably going to be a very small course.
I mean, you're right, which brings up the question of why did you do this segment? But you're also kind of wrong, because while this particular study or master's degree is smaller, Magic is on the upswing in Western academia. And yes, while I would prefer it was on the upswing for its own merits and not for social justice, we need to subvert Western ways of thinking bullshit reasons. At the very least, when we successfully beat social justice, I see no reason why Magic shouldn't stick around. And maybe in a century or so, I hope I live long enough to see it, we might get back to a more constructive version of the medieval approach of Magic gets to be classed with at the very least, the rest of the humanities, if not the sciences. Because I'd be fine if it was stuck in the same category as like philosophy and anthropology and shit. So like, I wouldn't be opposed to that. Obviously, I would prefer if it were classed along the lines of, at the very least, as legitimate as the soft sciences, but you can't have everything, and I wouldn't want the best to be the enemy of the good in that sense. So, moving forward, I think we should skip to the trailer for time purposes. Unless you want to end with the discussion.
There's still 40 seconds of this left, and I figured, yeah, we'll do the trailer.
All right, but yeah, Jack-o'-lanterns then.
If you took all the woke stuff out, I would say, yeah, good. People still need to know about this stuff, right?
people still need to take broomstick riding lessons.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, have you not seen Harry Potter? That documentary was great.
We appreciated that segment from the.
Okay, I know he's joking, but Harry Potter is one of the least good and accurate and well thought out magic systems in fiction. So, still, fuck you. You couldn't have even met me halfway and gone Harry Dresden. You had to reference the Potter thing again. But Yeah, I know he's joking, but that's still. Someday, I hope that another franchise will take Harry Potter's spot as the go-to reference point for people's understanding of magic. I would vote for the Dresden Files with bells on, as ever. But moving forward, Jack-o'-lanterns. Okay, no, it ended good. And now onto the trailer that Brainstorm wanted to cover.
So I'm going to assume that most people here would know who the YouTuber Markiplier is.
Yes, I do. I don't watch much of his stuff, but I do know who he is.
I mean, I don't either. I watch it sparingly. Not bad.
He's
It's actually,
He's kind of in the same category as PewDiePie for me, of I know who he is, and obviously he's a big name on the internet, but I've never really watched much of his stuff.
I've watched more of Markiplier stuff than PewDiePie because honestly, Markiplier he's very varied in his content. He does he does video games. I guess it's kind of what he started out as. But he's also done video series that are Choose Your Own Adventures, which are fun. I've played them. Problem is, Dresden Files is not fit for kids, and Harry Potter is loose and random enough for the casuals to like it. That and already established in that role.
I would actually dispute whether Dresden Files is fit for kids. Maybe not young kids like first graders and stuff, but preteens and teenagers. I don't think they would have a problem with it. They don't drop enough F-bombs in Dresden Files to be only for adults. I don't think. When they're about the same, around the same time that they get old enough to do Haunting Hour or Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I don't see any reason why you couldn't have introduced Dresden Files to that point.
All right. So this is the first trailer for Iron Lung, which is a movie that has NSFW content. You see it, at least post sex ed or something. There's no sex ed. They got rid of it. I didn't do that in high school.
That baffles me. Maybe it was always different in Indiana. I don't know, but we definitely had sex ed.
No, we had sex ed not sex ed, but the health class in elementary school, and that was about it.
I think our sex ed was tied to our. Actually, no. I think our sex ed might have been tied to our driver's ed for some reason. But one where yeah, okay, maybe yeah, when they're 14, 15, when they're taking sex ed, then by all means Dresden Files, because okay, yeah, sure. But even then, the NSFW content in Dresden Files is not so egregious that you couldn't get 12-year-olds or 13-year-olds into it. The most NSFW stuff for the most part is just Harry describing how beautiful women are, which there's only to the best of my knowledge 3 actual sex scenes in Dresden. There's one in Death Masks because when Maggie was conceived. There's one in Small Favor because of the Lucio scene. There's one in Skin Game, which is the dream sequence. And actually no, in Blood Rights there is the Murphy gets naked to crawl through laser scene. So yeah, 4 in 16 books or 17 books.
Okay, so this is just for Iron Lung, which Markiplier is directing and creating because he helped get a indie game known as Iron Lung. Which I have the story pulled up here on my phone that I would explain it. But he is producing it. But yeah, he's making this of his own. It's an indie film, effectively. But I had watched this and I thought it was worth something. Because I'm aware that some YouTubers have made movies in the past that are terribly dog shit. But Markiplier, I think, is different for a few reasons. Just because, one, he's actually done like a lot of filmmaking and stuff, like for short films and stuff on his channel, like skits and stuff that are actually, again, like I said, well made.
Mm-hmm.
And this, we'll get into it, but this is effectively me trying to sell this to you guys, effectively. So it is based off an indie horror game, so it's a horror movie, and well, spooky season and all.
I didn't realize Markiplier was directly involved with it, and I didn't realize it was based on a video game.
Yeah, he's directing it.
Good for him, going up in the world.
Okay, so the plot of Iron Lung is in a future where humanity is colonized space, an event known as the Quiet Rapture causes all stars and habitable planets in the universe to inexplicably disappear, leaving only individuals aboard space stations or starships alive. To secure the survival of humanity, the Consolidation of Iron launches an expedition to AAP-5, the desolate moon that has recently formed an expansive ocean of human blood, believed to hold vital resources desperately required to sustain human life. The player character is a convict can navigate the trenches of the Blood Ocean in a small submarine nicknamed the Iron Lung to verify the existence of the resources. Due to the pressure and depth of the ocean, the main hatch is welded shut. A forward viewpoint has been encased in metal, and communications are lost shortly after submersion. The player is promised freedom upon the return to the surface, but a note left by a previous occupant of the submarine warns them otherwise. Yeah, so that does imply that this is effectively like a one set movie, which is very interesting because we don't get a lot of those. And
oh, it's a bottle movie.
Is that what they're called?
Yeah, a bottle movie where it's only where it's someone locked in a single setting or something.
Yeah, it should be at least. It could have some trippy scenes depending on this trailer that I've seen, but it honestly kind of comes across as like a possible psychological thriller with the added element of being trapped submerged underwater, which I don't think I've ever had a fear of the ocean, but that does sound fucking terrifying.
Yeah, no, honestly, one of my fears, I mean, I have quite a lot of fears, but one of those fears is being trapped somewhere. Particularly, there's a movie called Gerald's Game on Netflix where a woman is strapped or handcuffed to a bed and then left there because her husband dies mid. They were basically trying to do BDSM stuff, and then he suffered a heart attack right before they did. So she's handcuffed to the bed for several days. God, that's creepy.
Right. I've also heard, and I will probably try to verify this, but I've heard that there is a lot, because of this ocean of blood, they used a lot of blood, like practical blood in this.
Well, good for them. Practical effects or augmented practical effects for the win. genuinely do believe that the best of both worlds is when you use CGI to augment practical effects. But
yeah, like best of both worlds. Like I never get why no one really does that. Like
yeah, I
But-
don't know why they go either full practical or all CG. It's like no, CGI is at its best when it augments shit that actually exists. Like in Jurassic Park.
Okay.
But anyway.
I'm aware Dalton is a live action simp, right? So
it's more impressive when you translate things from concept to drawing to thing that is actually there. I'm sorry.
For me, as long as it's well made, I don't care if it's animation or like it has a good story, great characters. Then as long as you sense like the passion and effort put into every aspect. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, this Iron One of the trailer, and thankfully it has subtitles. So.
Anyway, Jack-o'-lanterns.
This is not an expedition. It's an execution. When they put you in here, they don't want you to return.
Okay. Interesting so far.
I gotta say, it really, for a minute 34 of a trailer, which it's good that it's kind of a condensed trailer, to be fair, it really sets the tone and mood really well.
Well, I mean, they also don't have many money shots to pull from, so they're relying on building atmosphere, I would imagine.
Fair
Which
enough.
isn't necessarily a bad choice. Frankly, even if you have money shots, it's better if you build proper atmosphere. But
Yeah. But I'm appreciating because clear thought was put into making this trailer to really sell you this, and you're just getting like this real, like with the music, which I think it's supposed to be like the editor. Actually, no, wait. Hold on. Let me look it up because I have heard that it is someone, but that's a thing with like modern, like some modern horror movies I've watched. I mean, some are an exception, but the music, because I think this is supposed to be the original score.
movies in general have lost the ability to use music recently, and it annoys me.
It's weird because I've actually listened, like I've taken time to listen to like certain like specific OSTs of certain movies, like the Candyman movie that came out in 2021.
Oh, the recent remake.
Yeah, the Jordan Peele one. Which is really good, and like, you know, Spider-Verse 2 with Danny Pemberton. Like there are good soundtracks. It's just like
it doesn't seem like they put the effort or the focus into making an iconic film score anymore.
Right. Okay. Okay. There's okay, so the guy is Andrew Olshark, which he's now done. Oh shit! He worked on Doom Eternal for the score. He's a video game composer.
Which, given that this is technically a video game adaptation, is the correct answer, probably.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
I don't know why they're not willing to give people who like work on the original material, the material to play with when they do adaptations. It never made any sense to me. I mean, look at how successful Nintendo's insistence on having creative control over the Super Mario Brothers movie was.
Right.
Maybe the people who created the original might have some import to say when you're adapting it. Now, granted, some of the time said creatives betray their own work, cough Neil Gaiman, but you can't have everything.
But I also want to point out what is being said here is from the direct note from the actual game of like the last guy who was in the Iron Lung,
Mm.
which is really cool. So this makes me think it's technically a prequel to the game itself.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, shall we?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
And even if you do, and even if they keep their promises, what freedom waits for you? A few dying ships in a sea of dead stars. If there is still hope, it lies beyond the veil. Hope.
Okay, I am loving this dialogue. They do not write intelligent dialogue near as much as they should, and I like this dialogue.
Central was just being dumb, but there are some writers who just can't jump medium. 40K has a big problem with that. The great author making shit movie and game shit.
I mean, and that's why you need someone helping the author or what have you, but
it's a complicated thing. I agree with you, Don, and I also agree with Dragon Girl. There are very few people who work in like a specific medium that are fluid enough that they can jump to another one and make it work. Or so
yeah, I mean, kudos to the ones that can. Like, for example, Michael Dougherty, the guy that gave us Trick or Treat, which is the best Halloween movie ever, was also the guy who wrote the comics for Trick or Treat.
Also, I believe the guy who did the Scary Godmother movie also drew like comics for them, like originally.
Are there Scary Godmother comics? Are there Scary Godmother comics? I didn't know that.
I think it's a storybook.
Okay, well, even so, that's cool. But funnily enough, the comics I believe came after the movie. In the case of Trick or Treat, he wanted to revisit Sam, and so he made a comic. Although apparently Michael Dougherty is a big comic fan, which is why, if you remember the Trick or Treat title sequence, there are actual comic panels in it.
It's a book series, a trilogy. Huh.
Now, did the Cartoon Network specials come first, or did the books come first?
So the earliest book was in 1997. The Halloween Spectacular 2003.
Okay, so the special is based on the book series then. Okay.
Yep. Oh. Interesting. So yeah, like I admit it is a rarity. I think that there are certain creatives that work in certain mediums that can jump around to other ones.
Mm-hmm.
It's very rare.
Like for example, Neil Gaiman's biggest problem when he let Netflix adapt Sandman was he didn't leave it alone. He actually regretted writing Sandman the way he wrote it originally and wanted to, air quotes, improve it, which shows me that Neil Gaiman has no possible definition of the word improvement, or at least not one that I would recognize as improvement, because he basically ruined it and removed all the cool shit.
Right. But yeah, going back to the trailer, the dialogue, yeah, is well written, and again, like I said, I think it is from the actual note that is found in the game. And since it was created by like one person, and the developer, that I wonder. It did say that the creator of the game was helping work on this as well.
Mm-hmm. Which good for them as well. Also good for anyone who can beat the video game movie curse. Or video game adaptation curse, even.
Yeah, Markiplier is directing. It's pretty cool. I'm trying to look up and see who helped write this, if it was just him or not. But I like the dialogue that portrays the characters. Like one, there, it's I want to say it's nihilistic in a way, like how the tone of it is.
I don't think so. I think it's too stylized to be nihilistic. I think it's just dark.
No, from the character's perspective.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah. Like characters just giving up.
Mm-hmm. Now,
Okay,
is the arc of the game him foregoing that nihilism and eventually getting off his ass, or
No, it's from what I remember of seeing gameplay, it is effectively just like it's just like a horror game with a lot of like, it's an atmospheric horror game. Like the character is just the player, which is silent and stuff. So
okay, so basically,
but the character who wrote the note is the one that came before the player. So that's why I said that like this is probably like a prequel to the game.
okay. So basically, this is a horror game that plays on existential horror more than like jump scares and shit.
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
I mean, you're trapped in a sea of blood in a tiny, cramped metal submarine that is rusted and failing.
Well, I mean, I didn't know if there was like krakens or like, I don't know. You could easily do like a almost eldritch horror thing. Like maybe there was a Cthulhu type creature that woke up underneath it or something.
And so yeah, so there's also writing on the creator of the game is also helping write this. Which is pretty cool. But again, yeah, I just like how like the alright, so the Jester trailer that we reviewed like what 2 weeks ago,
Mm-hmm.
and how that was based off a YouTube thing, like a series of YouTube films that I think are kind of better than what I saw in the trailer.
Yeah.
This, I think, is how you kind of do that in terms of like
it's capturing more of the soul of the thing.
yeah.
Dragon Turtle. That is part of it. The other part of it is the mere existence of Mr. Uwe Boll. He is responsible for at least half of all the bad video game adaptations.
I also want to point out also the fact is most of the time the people that are put in charge of those adaptations,
they're dismissive and disrespectful towards the source material because they don't think it could possibly be anything good.
Well, that, and also they're never fans or never understand the source or are willing to understand. Do the research and stuff.
Yeah,
I know
it's the same problem comic book movies had for a while. The basic assumption was this isn't serious art, therefore we have to fix it. And by fix it, we mean remove all the awesome shit. And then
Yeah.
they get surprised Pikachu faced when the fan base goes, "Wait, you mean you wanted all of the shit we thought was silly or irrelevant?" To which the fan base responds is, of course, inevitably, "Yes, that's exactly what makes it awesome. Fuck you."
Anyway, shall we?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
In this void is as illusionary as the starlight. I will choose to breathe my last here, at the bottom of an ocean. Unseen. Unheard.
Okay, question: is there some reason the submarine can't be like raised up to sea level again?
It's controlled from the top, so it's lowered there, and I think has to be lowered from up top.
Okay,
And
okay. So
basically, the only thing you can do is just move it around, but you can't go up.
okay, so the people, did everyone controlling the thing die, or did someone
No.
actually
Okay,
do this to him on purpose?
they're convicts with the promise that if they do what they're told, which is try and find resources in those things, they will get their freedom.
Oh, it's a D-class movie, basically. Then, okay.
Basically, yeah. Obviously,
Okay.
they die or something, or supposed to at least.
Yeah, okay. So the protagonist of this game is basically a D-class who works for the SCP Foundation. That is now my headcanon.
I mean, not the fact that they're in space, and again, the whole thing of like, a lot of the habitable planets and stars in space have disappeared, leaving remnants of humanity on space stations and ships, trying to find a habitable place to live. So humanity's slowly dying off in space.
Yeah, I could see this. I could see this working as an SCP, especially if the ocean of blood is a literal ocean of literal blood.
I think it's supposed to be, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, this is a apocalyptic SCP fan fiction in my head now.
Okay. But yeah, music's really good. Like again, music helps elevate stuff in a movie or a show or anything.
And for some reason, most people have just forgotten that, which I don't
But
know why.
like this theme, which I'm assuming might be the main, maybe it's already stuck in my head. Like
Yep.
if I were to listen to it a few more times, I'd probably be able to hum it. But
Earworm successful, correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
But just like hearing, I already know how it goes, and it's so unique. It's not a traditional kind of score in a way. It's very symphonic.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's orchestral, but in like you put an orchestra in a synthesizer.
Mm-hmm.
And to be fair, I love synthesizers.
Mm-hmm. I I don't mind synthesizers when they're used well. I don't really have a preference for or against them, really.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think that's just kind of our default of I don't mind it as long as it's done well.
Hmm.
All right, shall we?
Jack-o'-lanterns.
Uncontrolled. They will get their execution. I will get my freedom.
Okay, this is the weirdest connection that my brain just made. But have you ever seen the Twilight Zone episode, The Obsolete Man?
I've never heard of that.
It's an episode set in a dystopian future where, for some reason, the prisoner is allowed to choose the parameters of their execution, and the guy who gets uh charged with an execution, he gets executed because society has determined that he's obsolete because he's a librarian and there's no need for books in this dystopian future. So he basically sets things up so that his execution can be used as a mechanism to troll the dystopian government. And he ends up requesting that the person who sentenced him gets thrown into the room that's about to explode with him. And he basically is able to make the point to the dystopian future via making this guy plead for humane treatment to be let out of this cell. It's a really good episode, and it features Burgess Meredith, who was a reoccurring cast member on Twilight Zone a lot.
And that's 14 seconds left. So shall we?
Yep, Jack-o'-lanterns. Neat and good for Markiplier. It's always nice to see not just any old independent content creator, but a YouTuber in particular be successful at stuff like this.
Yeah. Again, I really think he could do a good job on it just because one, it kind of became a passion project for him. Two, I've seen like his like directing stuff and, again like the series of like Studio and Adventure things.
Mhm.
Well made, well written. Specifically one that came out relatively recently in the last year or so called In Space with Markiplier Parts 1 and 2.
Neat.
And yeah, I hope it does well. I really do.
And again, it's always nice to see someone beating the video game curse. Video games might be slowly on the rise. They might be what replaces comics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that, folks, I want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, avidase, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
One more week. Until then, fuck off because I haven't eaten.